Okay. How radical feminism ruins everything. Ben Shapiro live at University of Buffalo.
What's going on, UB? You guys got your popcorn ready? All right, for those of you that do not know me, I am Mike Powers, and I am the chairman of the University of Buffalo's Young American for Freedom chapter. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Young Americans for Freedom, we are the premier student activist organization in the conservative movement. We work hard to educate our fellow students on American founding principles, things like individual freedom, free enterprise, a strong national defense, and the tradition of American values that made our country so great.
I hate how they keep just saying this and as if like their political opponents weren't like in favor of like the good things of America.
I hope that all of you enjoy
I
tonight.
hate that
If any of you would
mischaracterization.
like to see more things that are carried out like this at the University of Buffalo, or if you just want to stay up to date with our plans this school year, remember to sign at the front table of the newsletter out by the entrance. Tonight, I'd like to thank all those who made this event possible. Learn to let go. Continue to do great things in life.
Okay.
Liberal viewpoints are considered and treated as fact, and anyone who deviates from these beliefs is considered to be ignorant or intolerant. I happen to be a
Usual
huge fan
stuff.
of Ben Shapiro. I've watched numerous hours of Ben dismantling the likes of social justice warriors, CNN anchors, and
He doesn't dismantle them. He presents logic, but like only a certain type of logic. He selectively uses logic to like supposedly dismantle
plenty
them.
of ill-prepared leftists. What started out as
Yeah, and then that's the thing, ill-prepared. Like his opponents are poorly prepared. He's better prepared.
entertainment quickly became an educational tool for me the more I observed.
It's not.
It
It's
is
a
because of Ben that I've decided
miseducational
to involve
tool.
myself into politics at such a young age.
Jesus Christ.
I'm
A new deplorable. Like, can you believe it? Like, how can anyone like literally be like be idealistically believe in like Rourkeism? You know, like how do they do that? How like I'm gonna yeah I want to save the world by being an orc, you know, and fighting for Sauron. Yeah, that's so like
grateful for
how
Ben
does this
Shapiro's
happen?
logical reasoning
How
because it reinforces conservative beliefs.
how does
He
this
arms us with
happen?
the facts so we may negate the illogical arguments that leftists present. I'm so glad that I'm 18 and registered to vote.
So ironic, the illogical arguments that leftists present. So
Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Shapiro. So, so far, so good. Well, it's amazing to be here at University at Buffalo. When I was growing up, I actually always had a soft spot for the Buffalo
this
Bills. I used to
makes
watch
me
Jim Kelly
puke.
play. And when my wife and I were dating, we actually decided to
Look
take
at
a
the
trip around
irony
Christmas.
that so many right-wingers are like have conspiracies against Jews. I guess I'm thinking of this wearing his kippah, you know. So many of them at the same time like hate Jews and think that Jews want to like take over the world and you know, flying spaceships and crap like Marjorie Taylor Greene said and like literally so many of them like have this like Jews will not replace us and shit. And like literally he is fighting for that crowd.
Time to Niagara Falls, which is just something Californians think is a good idea. So that's the last time I was in Buffalo. That was 11 years ago, and it was not good. And I'll say that we had just been engaged, and we did a trip where we went to Philadelphia.
Yeah, I want to see. So his wife is a doctor. I don't want to like who is his what is her specialty? Ben Shapiro. Why isn't she like an obs? I think she's an obgyn, isn't she? More Shapiro. Let's see. Ben Shapiro bragging about his wife's DAP as 2020's biggest. What's a DAP? Ben Shapiro is a real problem with female sexuality. Let's see. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro bragging about his doctor wife never getting aroused in his presence is a glorious cell phone. That's what how's that DAP? Listen, guys, I will explain on the show that's misogynistic to question whether graphic descriptions of wet ass pussy is empowering for women women. Wet ass pussy is obviously an incredibly profound statement of women's empowerment, a la Susan B. Anthony. So I guess that's ironic. As I also discussed on the show, my only real concern is that the women involved should apparently require a bucket and a mop, get the medical care they require. My doctor's wife's differential diagnosis, bacterial vaginosis, yeast infection, or trichomonas. Or put another way, less delicate way, women he has wet in his presence and suffering from disease. Snarf. What? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I get it. Now I get it. I'm pretty slow with this stuff. Okay. Yeah. Ben Shapiro's attempts at being vaginally aware are coming off dry. Yeah, it's unclear why Ben Shapiro has a paying job in the first place. That's so ridiculous. You know how all these people say like, "Oh, Bernie has never had a real job" and stuff, and like Ben Shapiro is like doing this. Okay, who is Ben Shapiro's wife? Moore, the son. Moore Shapiro is wife of. Okay, so that's her. Wait, she looks like somebody. I think she looks like a mix of people like I know from real life and from TV. Unlike her husband, Moore shies away from the spotlight and has pursued a medical career. She also looks pretty young. Like if she's the same age as Ben, she also looks pretty young for her age. Moore Shapiro, born Moore Toledano, is the wife of a controversial politician commentator, Ben Shapiro. He's the founder and editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, an American conservative news website. Moore was born in 1988 in Herzliya, Israel, to a Jewish Moroccan family. She moved to Sacramento, California at the age of 12. It is thought she's a family medicine doctor in Woodland Hills, California. In a piece for Newsweek magazine, Ben wrote, "Early in our marriage, my wife was still in college at UCLA, and I was interested in taking a job in New York. She dutifully offered to transfer to college across the country. When she applied to medical school across the country, I offered to move my job." So kind of him. I mean, no, that is actually a good thing. Ben and his wife were introduced to each other by his younger sister Abigail. The pair got married in 2008 in a traditional Jewish wedding ceremony in Accra, Israel. In a blog post following the marriage, Ben wrote, "I got married last week. I'm 24 years old. My wife is 20. Together we plan with the help of God on having healthy, happy, freedom-loving children who will grow up with the security provided by the armed guard." It's not known how long they were dating before getting engaged in 2007. The pair wasted no time in tying the knot in 2008. The couple had 2 children, a daughter named Leah Eliana Shapiro, born in 2014, and a son who was born in 2016. Poor kids. Okay, blah, 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 blah. Great, great, great. More Shapiro. So that is her. So we've got couple pictures of her. Oh, there's her in doctor garb. Alrighty. That is all we needed to know. Okay, here we go. How radical feminism ruins everything.
Philadelphia and Washington, D.C. And then we decided we would go to Niagara Falls for New Year's, not realizing, of course, that there's this thing called snow and cold. And so we got up here. There was no food, because I keep kosher. We keep kosher. So all we had was literally for 24 hours a bag of bagel chips. And I remember that we went to a local Holiday Inn.
Again, and like Republicans, meanwhile, want to force people to eat pork, right? Because like, again, like I can't believe he's like fighting for his enemies.
Because we couldn't afford anything else. And we stopped at the front desk and we said, we need a limo we need some sort of car. We just need a car to get to Niagara Falls. And of course, this being a relatively cheap hotel, the person behind the desk had some sort of kickback arrangement with some guy. And so
just
us
tell
being
me why
idiots,
you
we were like,
hate
sure, that
feminism.
guy. So the guy pulls up and he's driving about a 1979 Cadillac
I don't have anything
limousine
to comment on this.
with a red velvet interior. And we trepidatiously get in the back of the limo, and we have our clutching our bag of bagel chips like the poor urchins that we were. And the limo driver starts talking to us. He tells us that he's been married 6 times, and he explains that he is hungry and reaches back into our bag of bagel chips and proceeds to start noshing on our only food. And then decides he's going to give marital advice to my wife. And I figured, okay, he's married 6 times. He must know something. And the only piece of advice that I actually remember was him just saying over and over and over, "Keep the spice alive." And her looking at me like, I want to die. The
But
good news
apparently,
is we've been married for
based on that previous article,
10
he
years.
failed
The bad news is we haven't
even
been
do
back to
that.
Buffalo since. But this is a lot better. This is a lot better. So I really
Again, I don't know,
appreciate you guys
but I know that's maybe a bit mean. I mean, I'm not gonna sort of get myself involved in private
coming out.
affairs. All right, come on.
Well, tonight I want to talk about the hot topic of the day, the relations between men and women. If you listen to the media, or if you live on a college campus, chances are pretty good you think that we here in the United States are in the middle of a war between the sexes. And that, of course, is particularly true following the saga of Brett Kavanaugh that we just watched, in which the political left, including the mainstream Democratic Party, decided that belief in the presumption of innocence and due process of law did not apply to men. They decided that if you're a Republican man, or if you're a conservative man, or if indeed you are merely a textualist interpreting constitutional scholar of a man, then this means that any accusation should be enough to take you down. Now, none of this is to say that we shouldn't take accusations seriously. Of course we should. But before you can destroy a man's life, it appears that you might need one shred of corroborating evidence, like anything. And the fact that the left refused that was just an example of the left trying to polarize the Democratic Party, trying to polarize the country on an issue where basically everybody agrees. See, this is the thing about the Me Too movement. Everybody basically agrees with the point. No one who is of good heart wants to see women mistreated. No one who is of good heart wants to see women who are sexually assaulted and sexually mistreated not taken seriously. We all agree with this. But the left in this country has an unfortunate habit, and that is that on issues where we all agree, the left will pick a bad example, and then when people react badly to the bad example, they will suggest that the main principle is being disrespected. So they will say, well, we all believe in Me Too. And we'll say, right, we all believe in Me Too. And then they'll say, okay, well, how about we ruin this guy's life based on an uncorroborated allegation from 36 years ago? And then we're like, well, we might want, like, some evidence, please? And they go, oh, you don't believe in Me Too. If you believed in Me Too, then obviously you would want this guy's life ruined. All of this makes for some pretty ugly talk. It makes for a pretty ugly climate in the room.
In that
it's rather insane, and it's particularly insane in a society where women are treated better than any society in the history of mankind. Okay, to put America's
the bar is
female
very
existence
low.
in perspective,
Bar is very low.
America's females are freer, richer, more prosperous, less ill-treated than any women in the history of humankind ever, bar none.
Yeah, that is
There may be an argument about whether some women are treated better in places like Norway, but that's about the only argument.
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk tonight about the radical feminist movement, because here's the truth. The modern feminist movement, which has radicalized itself, is a disgraceful
Again, the thing is that, like, it's not like men are now being discriminated against at all, or except in these few instances, with the glaring exception of instances like Me Too, where, yes, they sometimes, there are some people who get, like, accused unfairly and that they get in big trouble for things that they shouldn't. But overall, like, there's nowhere near the kind of just systemic oppression that existed until very recently for women.
Departure from the original feminist movement. I believe that I am an original feminist. Not because I'm old, but just because I believe in the principles of original feminism. I think original feminism was about certain basic rights, basic human equality, the ability for women to vote, to get any job for which they were qualified, to make decisions about marriage.
Okay. Well, thank you for saying this again. I don't know. Like, I sort of wonder if this would be really what you even would believe in if, the whole global, like, especially American and Western, like, ideology hadn't progressed to where it is now. My guess is that you probably wouldn't support those things. But of course, in any case, that's just mere speculation. As I think we have to believe people on what they say they believe in and on their actions. So I'm like, yeah, that is a very good thing that he's saying that. We can completely applaud him for that, and we should try to take him for at his, how do you say, for his word? Take at his word.
Child's rearing for themselves.
Take his word for it.
I believe in all of those things. When I was growing up, my mom was the one who worked, and my dad stayed at home with the kids. I am rather famously married to a doctor myself. I spend more time at home with my own kids than my wife does because she chooses to be a doctor. And then when she is done with her residency, she wants to work on a per diem basis so she can spend more time with the kids. And I support her choices all the way through. When she took time off with our kids, I supported it. And when she does not take time off because she wants to get through her residency, I support it because I am essentially a feminist. But that's first wave feminism. Then came the radicals. Feminism moved from being about achieving equal rights for women to something different. Instead, feminism was turned into a fight over three chief ideas. One, men and women are absolutely identical. Not they have equal rights, not they should be treated with equal opportunity, but they are absolutely identical. There are no differences between men and women.
Yeah,
Second,
that's a mistake because like obviously there are biological differences, like not just physical, but like biologically determined mental differences. I think that should be pretty obvious to anyone, and that's not just caused by culture. So I think it's silly to deny it. Now, I personally think that's actually to some extent a mistake because then it will precisely lead to people kind of pigeonholing people just based on your sex, which is why like it's one of the reasons why I support just moving to hermaphroditism. But it's obviously, I mean, if you want there to be no differences between sexes, well then then actually eliminate those differences, but don't pretend there really aren't any differences when in fact there are. And that's sort of one thing that annoys me is that, you know, like Marxists, they claim to be a science, like when whereas other political ideologies are just ideologies, but Marxism is a science. You know how they do that? That is, of course, ridiculous, and in many ways, it's I mean, it's sort of it's cultish to kind of say that. And um, although, of course, I personally would say that my own ideology, I don't claim it's a science, whereas others aren't a science, but I claim that my ideology is rational, whereas others are not. Um, so in that sense, it's pretty similar. But the point is that, I mean, if Marxism had been right about everything, then okay. But the point is that it isn't. And in particular, there's this tendency to deny, you know, the influence of biology on differences between people.
that the patriarchy, every institution of American society, the freest, best society in the history of mankind, all of those institutions are reflective of an evil patriarchal system. And finally, we need a new standard, we need new mores to replace the old patriarchal standard. So these are the three ideas. Men and women are exactly the same. The patriarchy is responsible for everything bad. Tear down the patriarchy and replace it with something new.
Yeah, but I kind of agree with the patriarchy thing though. It's just it's there's this you know this machismo which I find is really oppressive to everyone. So yeah.
Now, these ideas were all based on one central point, that all social wrongs are the product of power hierarchies, that all inequities, that all inequalities are inequities, that
Yeah.
any disproportion between men and women in any particular sphere of life had to be due to some sort of discrimination.
But the problem is that he correctly recognizes where these lefty people go wrong, but then he goes much too far the other way.
As opposed to free choice that manifests as disproportion. Foundational pillars of Western civilization, according to this radical feminist take, could be torn down without harming women. Such destruction would actually empower women, but that's not what happened. These ideas were catastrophically, terribly, horribly wrong. Tonight we're going to look at how radical feminism ruined the most important...
This is you know, what should I say, leftist alarmism, like alarmism about leftist movements, sort of like, you know, there's climate alarmism. And this is what the right do. They do sort of leftist alarmism.
institutions in a functioning society, and in the process actually leads to less happiness for women. But before that, we have to start with some basic science. So I hate to break it to the gender studies majors in the room. Number one, I don't know where you're going to get a job. That's the first thing I hate to break to you. But
Look at these deplorables.
there are only so many jobs
Deplorables.
at academic journals that publish papers about dog park rape and such. But that was actually a reference to an actual paper that was published by a feminist journal. I don't know if you followed this story. It's a great story. Apparently there are these academics who published 7 fake papers in top academic journals in gender studies. And one of them was about how dog parks and dogs humping one another was actually a reinforcement for heteronormativity. This was published in a gender studies journal. So I wasn't just making that up, okay? Here's the second thing I hate to break to the gender studies major in the class. Sex is not a social construct. Sex is not a social construct. And gender is not a social construct. Now, the idea that gender and sex are completely separate is, of course, very silly. There are certain aspects of gender, masculine and feminine, that are, of course, social constructs. But that does not mean that the vast majority of things that distinguish men from women are social constructs. That's just nonsense. Men and women, on average, are not the same. You know how I know this? Because I have functioning retinas and a functioning prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, but it's on average again, and so like the problem is that because of your sort of people like on the right, they want to sort of pigeonhole people into your category, and they want you to act like a stereotype. And literally, you can see there's always like hatred towards like women who act masculine and hatred towards men who act feminine. And that is the issue here. And basically, what these right wingers want is to force people to act like stereotypes, even though they claim that they claim that they just are sort of unhappy about these left wingers as sort of artificially trying to create equality of outcome when that wouldn't actually naturally happen. And that of course they're right about that. The problem is that subconsciously they're actually motivated by a desire to make everyone act like a stereotype of their own sex.
I have a child. I have two children. One is a girl, one is a boy. They are extraordinarily different because boys and girls are different. We used to know these things because we had not frontally lobotomized ourselves to facts. Men and women, boys and girls, they are not identical. And
Yeah, again, so the point is that here he's right, but the average Ben Shapiro listener, what is the average Ben Shapiro listener gonna take away from this? The average Ben Shapiro fan is gonna take away that actually, it's not just that on average males and females are different, but that literally that like it's unnatural, for a female to not act like your stereotypical female and your male to not act like a stereotypical male. That's what they're gonna remember, and so then that's gonna create prejudice and discrimination against people who don't conform.
how they think, what they desire, or how they act. They are not identical in various areas of mental aptitude. In some cases, women are stronger, and in some cases, men are stronger, or in distribution of aptitude in various fields, or in physical aptitude. Treating men and women as identical, as though they are identical, suggesting they are the same except for the penis or the vagina, is anti-scientific idiocy.
Okay, but remember, Ben, how at the same time you oppose the idea of like treating people separately based on race, because like you say you're like anti-identity politics, because identity politics is precisely recognizing that people like collectively are like different based on their race and stuff, and they should be treated like differently. And see, I object to that. But the thing is that you are right now doing that exact same thing. You are doing identity politics for the sexes. In fact, that's actually in practice what you're doing. Pretending to be anti-identity politics, right? Pretending to just let every individual do things on their own, right? Like at the surface, you're like, okay, well, women on average like prefer to not work as much, so that's why women earn less, and that is very much a valid point. That is very much a valid point. However, I want to point out that the subtext, and it's very important because pretty much all right wingers are like this. There's like very few like honest right wingers that actually believe in what they say, because from the moment that they actually do believe in that kind of stuff, well, they're no longer even right wingers. Actually, they'd be considered left wingers. Like literally, like a good right winger is a left winger. And so like George Soros, for example, or you know, that sort of, or like me, like literally. So yeah, yeah. So that you have to always bear in mind that these right wingers have a subtext by and large, and the subtext here is that not just women on average, but fundamentally all women probably prefer. And yes, he's married to a doctor, so sure he acknowledges that there are differences, but at the same time, that there is always the subtext that is being. I mean, not always maybe, but usually, there is the subtext that basically, women just women as a whole prefer to be doing stereotypically feminine things, and that can if you let them have their way, that can lead to very problematic things. That can lead to very oppressive social structures, and basically it leads to discrimination again against people who don't conform to the stereotypes. So that this is something to always bear in mind when you hear this. At the surface, he is right. He is using logic, and he is correct in pointing out the problems of feminism, like that kind of aspect of feminism. But you have to understand that he also makes you believe in wrong things,
People
typically, or he that's kind of the intent, is to sort of make gullible people believe not just in look, I can't even know what Ben really believes in, but in practice, certainly that's what ends up happening.
say things like the penis is not a gendered organ. I what? Okay. There's an actual push a few weeks ago for people to call vaginas front holes because they didn't want to. I mean, I can't imagine what President Trump would even say about that on an Access Hollywood tape. As Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker says, differences between the sexes are part of the human condition. And by the way, they're a great part of the human condition. One of the nice
But
things
but you could still call it, like, I don't see why you could still call it a vagina. It wouldn't necessarily have to be a feminine thing.
about life is that men and women are different. This attempt to obliterate differences between men and women, beyond being idiotic and anti-scientific, is actually no fun at all. Okay, we call average
Yeah, but again, I like I said, I advocate for abolition of sexes. That doesn't mean that I advocate for abolition of like different character traits. You can still have feminine and masculine people. It's just that it wouldn't be on the basis of a particular sex, right? They'd just be literally just their personality and nothing else.
attributes and behaviors of men, masculinity. We call average attributes and behaviors of women, femininity. Gender studies theorists, as overpaid navel gazers, try to separate gender from sex, suggesting that attributes and behaviors are entirely socially constructed. Of course,
See, because I know personally that there's still much more oppression in the traditional sense of oppressing people who don't conform to stereotype, as opposed to oppression of the people who do. I certainly know that, I've tried to suppress my feminine traits since a very, very young age for that very reason. And it's only very recently that I've decided that actually let's be like screw it, and I'm actually not gonna I'm gonna stop doing that. And it's precisely because of the mindset of people like Ben, unfortunately, that do that and that make you feel ashamed for for who you are. For That's literally what that does in reality.
may be some behaviors that are socially constructed, as I said, but to honestly believe that all gender differences are separate from sex
Because
requires that
look,
you
I want you to think of this. Think about all these Ben supporters. Then the if you the kind of people who support Ben are also the kind of people who will like mock women for like being a butch lesbian or something, right? For and who will mock men for like being effeminate. So they'll say you're gay. They'll say, and that in the bad way. That would be a bad thing to say, that you're gay. They'll say like you're beta, and that's like because you're supposed to be like obnoxiously, domineeringly macho. So it's very toxic. See what uh with the pretense of just being reasonable, and I can totally understand that there is some unreasonableness to this idea of wanting, for instance, equality of outcome between the sexes when there are mean differences in personality. At the same time, what he's really doing, more importantly, is that he's defending the discrimination against pretty much everyone, since pretty much everyone is going to have some amount of their personality that doesn't completely correspond to the ultra stereotypical version of their sex. So what it amounts to having people being ashamed about part of who they are.
were dropped on your head as a baby, repeatedly. Like your parents dropped you and then they picked you up again and forcibly turned you upside down and then dropped you again on your head. Boys and girls are different. For example, many gender theorists have attempted to claim that boys and girls only like different toys because evil corporations decided that boys should have guns and girls should have dolls. Sweden has actually attempted to force boys to play with dolls and to force girls to play with guns or
Yeah, but the funny thing is that boys then play a lot with dolls when you market them as action figures. So, there might be a fair amount of validity to this idea that actually it's largely a social construct. So that I mean the preferences in toys are largely socially determined, um, but not entirely. I mean, yeah, there's a certain amount of truth. It's just not entirely.
Trucks or stereotypically masculine toys. This is silly talk. Okay, play differences between the sexes exist in rhesus monkeys. They really do. They've done studies. They found that our primate ancestors have sexual differences between how they treat toys. This is biologically innate. To take another example, the distribution of men and women in
Yeah,
terms
I can believe that. I don't know the study, but
of
yeah.
mathematics performance is different. Studies suggest that while men and women on average perform the same in math, the bell curve is not exactly the same. Men tend to have a much more shallow bell curve, and women tend to have a steeper bell curve. What that means is that the fat tail ends of the bell curve are different. Right? So while the average can be the same, if the bell curve for mathematics IQ for women, for example,
So what you're saying is that there are more really dumb people and really smart people among men, whereas women are more like all average.
like this, okay, then the tail ends are a lot thinner. If it looks like this for men, the average is the same, but the fat tail ends are a lot thicker. That means you got a lot of men who are really dumb at math and a lot of men who are really smart at math.
Yeah.
Okay, that means that the distribution in top companies for those fields may in fact be determined, at least in part, by differences in aptitude with regard to this stuff. That's
Yeah.
not sexist.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I personally agree with that. I mean, it's not even personally. This like it's like obviously seems to be likely the case, most likely the case. But the point is not so much my problem is not actually the fact that there are more men in top positions in these companies. The problem is that those top positions are way overpaid.
Okay, that's just reality. And that's not horrible, it's not terrible. It's also true that women are better than men at a great many things, including interpersonal relationships, which is why the vast majority of people who are in interpersonal relationship fields tend to be women. And yes, men and women differ in how they treat sex too. I know there's a big bugaboo for radical feminists. You're not supposed to talk about this. Men and women are supposedly we treat sex exactly the same. Again, have you met a man? Have you met a woman? Okay. Men are far more interested in variety and frequency than women on average. Women are far more interested in stability, comfort, and intimacy. Why? Because evolution says so. The reason evolution says so is because men are attempting to spread their genetic material, and women have to be selective about exactly whom they select to be the people with whom they mate. Because women only get a couple of shots at deciding who the dad of the baby is going to be. Whereas men can basically go out and do whatever they want. Okay, evolution drives male sex drive. It is not
Again, and this is a fundamental unfairness. And again, this is a major reason why I advocate for hermaphroditism.
the same thing as female sex drive. And the idiocy that suggests it is just that. It's just unbelievably stupid. My favorite example of this, there's a very famous experiment by a couple of academics named Clark and Hatfield from 1989. And here's what they did. What they did is they got an attractive male and an attractive female, and they sent these people into bars to try and pick people up. So they had the men and this attractive man go into a bar and
so the
find
male
all
will
women
be much
in the
less
bar
successful.
and say to them, "Want to come home tonight and have sex with me?"
Yeah,
And then they
I saw a thing done more recently in Italy where they did that, and like the woman pretty much was successful every time, and like out of 20 tries or something, the male just failed every time.
had a woman go into the bar and say to all the men in the bar, "Want to come home tonight and have sex with me?" Hey, you're all laughing because you know the result before I say it. Men, because men are pigs, said yes 75% of the time. We are built to be pigs. That's what we do. That's why we need civilization and marriage to civilize us and make us better and channel all those aggressive, terrible instincts toward actually building a home.
Well, I don't think that is a problem. Desiring sex is not actually a bad thing. That is not actually a problem. I've said there are bad things about masculinity, but that is not one of them. What is more a problem what is a problem is especially the tendency towards aggression and also like dominance at the expense of others, and that is very much a problem.
And a life, and defending women, and building civilizations. That's why we created a civilization, was to stop men from being who they naturally are.
And civilization actually required men to become less aggressive. And literally, there's this theory that seems quite plausible that civilization became only possible when there was as a result of selective breeding for less aggressive men, and in part as a result of the capital punishment of men who are more aggressive. And that makes complete sense. And so what I'm saying is that unfortunately there's still a lot of aggressiveness, and like think about it, the vast majority of criminals are men. There's reason for this beyond the fact that they're just stronger. It's not just that, and that is why I think we absolutely have to genetically engineer people to not have those violent tendencies, instead of having to forcefully, make the government interfere all the time and sort of fight against people's instincts. How about just remove the bad instincts? It makes much more sense.
75% of men said, hell yeah, let's do this thing. Okay, you know what percentage of women said yes to this proposition?
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah, zero.
Zero. No women, not a woman. Why? Because women aren't idiots about sex.
And see, this is why I'm still a virgin. I mean, I did, I've done this cold approaching thing, but obviously, I'm not one to sort of beat around the bush. So I just said like I'm looking for a girlfriend, um, and would you like to sort of hang out to see if we get along? And unfortunately, that is not something that works apparently. So at least not for someone like me. So yeah.
Only men are idiots about sex, as a general rule, unless the feminist
But
movement.
please don't say idiots. Again, that is not a bad thing. I mean, come on, it's a nice, pleasurable experience. Please don't like conflate that with the bad aspects of masculinity.
Teaches them.
And like if you're recognizing that there are bad aspects to masculinity, then why at the same time uh make such a strong effort to defend masculinity? Like if you're literally recognizing that the bad things about masculinity, how about precisely we eliminate the bad things that are specific to each sex? That would be what makes sense. And so here again, I'm showing you how Ben actually isn't thinking logically. See, he applies logic just to defend his own wrong, largely wrong, not entirely wrong, but largely wrong beliefs.
That it's actually valuable and feminist to be an idiot about sex. Then we can indulge our seamier side. As psychologists say, there is a reason that sperm is cheap and eggs are expensive. Okay, so let's start with institutions that radical feminism has had a massively terrible impact on. Let's start with the central institution for any functioning society, and that, of course, is the institution of marriage. So marriage is innately an amazing institution for women. For women. Okay, that does not mean that every aspect of marriage was always great for women. Obviously, legal arrangements where women were supposedly men's property were bad. Bigamy was awful, right? There were certain aspects of marriage that were bad. But
But look at how he says bad, he's like literally sort of making fun of the notion that being literally owned by someone else is a bad thing.
the monogamous standard of marriage and its place as the traditional standard in society was really, really good for women. Why? Because men could not logically expect women to go to bed with them without a serious commitment. Men were expected to value women's priorities. You actually had to, in the words of Nicholas Nassim Taleb, and this is not meant with any sort of pornographic reference, have some skin in the game. You actually had to attempt to make a commitment to another human being before the woman was expected to act in any sexual way. Men were expected to value stability and comfort and intimacy in a way men naturally do not when it comes to sex. Because marriage was actually about more than just pleasure.
But that is true, and that is what I'm saying. That is about having. This is what I've explained in my stages of human development, and how basically stage one is about having all these social rules that counter the instincts of stage zero. And so stage one, and those rules are useful because they help society, stick together and progress. But at the same time, they're actually individually oppressive, and they wouldn't even be necessary if everybody actually acted in a rational and largely altruistic manner.
Marriage was about building a life together. Mostly,
See,
marriage
like,
was about raising kids that you were going to have together.
see, like in a society that actually was truly rational and caring, everybody would just get a basic income, and so then it would be totally okay for women to not be married. And so, in fact, in societies where it's relatively easy, I've seen studies on this saying that, for instance, in places in Africa, for instance, where food is relatively abundant and easy to just sort of pick for yourself, well, polygyny, like one male having several females and then a bunch of males having no females, is more frequent precisely because females don't depend on a male. And so precisely, well, basic income would do the same thing. And this is why all these right-wingers who are fundamentally attached to the stage one type of society, which typically involves having all these rules that counter the instincts, well, they're not happy with this because it implies a reversion to a stage zero system of polygyny. Um, and so, of course, the way to fix this is to change people's instincts so that women, don't want to engage in polygyny, or that certainly that they don't have this tendency to want to flock towards the top males, and meanwhile, and be content to just be with a single male you know, instead of like going to seek out other males. So, I mean, what you need precisely, again, this is why I need hermaphroditism, is precisely to avoid the situation of polygyny. You need hermaphroditism for everyone to have the same desire for sex on average. So, of course, there could be individual differences, but you're not going to end up with this cast of people who are completely virgin or like incel or whatever, like me, precisely because of the situation. So like it's not like I don't care about this. I care about this immensely. I've been caring about this for 16 years. Okay, so it's not like I'm one of these people who just sort of say, oh, it's fine. What I don't know. I think fundamentally these right wingers don't understand that um, you know non-right wingers actually also care about maybe having like sex and relationships and stuff, and they aren't exactly thrilled either to not have that. And so obviously something needs to be done, for people's well-being. But the solution is not to enforce oppressive societal norms. The solution is to, create a system that enables everyone to be satisfied.
And the vast majority of marriage for all of human civilization was based around the idea you were going to have kids with the person that you married. That was what marriage was based around. And so you had to choose based on your brain, not on what's going on downstairs. You're supposed to choose based
Yeah, except that often it was actually forced upon you by your family.
on your brain. Is this a person I think is fit to raise my children, have children with, build a family with, and invest my time in? Then radical feminists decided that marriage had to be destroyed. They portrayed marriage as an awful cage. Betty Friedan, famous brain challenge feminist, suggested that marriage was a, quote, comfortable concentration camp. That is a direct quote.
Yeah, again, see, he says these sort of nasty quips and stuff, but a brain challenge feminist, like, no, not, not true. I mean, I don't know her, but I'm just saying that, like, it is a comfortable it is that it's oppressive. It is fundamentally oppressive. You might actually be better off being married than what you would be otherwise, but that's just because the society was like completely inequitable in other ways, right? If it actually had been a nice society, well, we would have had a basic income a long, long time ago already, and women could have just lived off of that.
She equated American marriage with concentration camps. She did this about 20 years after the Holocaust, so she was really, really with it. In fact, women didn't need men at all. As Gloria Steinem said, a woman needed a man like a fish needed a bicycle. Marriage could only survive by turning...
Again, yeah, in the way society actually was, it was useful for a woman to have a man, but precisely because lots of jobs were done by men and stuff, and then you could like share income. You could also like defend yourself. Man could defend her from other men, and all sorts of things like that. But basically, a woman needed a man because society was bad.
Into sort of a rom-com, right? And then this is how we get the rom-com version of marriage. What marriage really is two people fall in love and they get mutual pleasure from each other, and that's why they get married. There's only one problem with this. Okay, that's not actually how marriage works, as any married person in the room can tell you. That's not how marriage works. You fall in love with somebody, and then you look for values that you share with that person if you want to have a good marriage. Because, as Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, when it comes to relationships, at the very beginning of a relationship between a man and a woman, passion levels are very high, and what they call committed love is very low, because you don't know the person very much. And then, over time, passionate love declines because you're used to the person, and committed love goes way up. But if all you're expecting is passionate love from a marriage all the time, you're going to get bored around year 3. Okay, and this is just innate to how human beings operate with one another. So if what you were expecting was to build a home with a person with commitment related, then you're getting what you expect in marriage. If what you were expecting is a never-ending joy of passionate lovemaking in Hawaii, forget it. It's not happening, guys. Okay, so but this lie was perpetrated, and so marriage suddenly had different expectations.
But the thing is that it's still, it's still basing this idea of marriage being somehow like a responsibility. It's about people sort of having to you do something. It's like an effort. The right wingers fundamentally see life as a struggle, and they like literally want to keep life being a struggle. That's the thing. Like literally, technology is enabling life to be much less of a struggle, to allow us to just uh, have make it enjoyable and literally have just passionate relationships that don't even require commitment. Because again, what is this commitment thing? It's precisely because like people need to work and stuff to earn a livelihood. Again, if you've got a solid basic income, you wouldn't even need to particularly make a commitment because you're already society just fulfills your every need. And I don't understand why Republicans keep portraying that as a bad thing. Like literally, they want life to be a struggle for people.
Pew shows the top reason people now say they get married is love at 88%, followed by making a lifelong commitment at 81% and companionship at 76%. All of these involve you traded, and so marriage suddenly had different expectations.
And so what do you think would be a good title for this video? I'm thinking like Ben has a flawed vision of feminism. I'm really bad. I never know what to write. I don't know what to write. Ben Shapiro misinterprets feminism and gender rules. Ben Shapiro is being silly. Ben Shapiro is misleading people. Yeah, Ben Shapiro misleads you about gender, feminism, and gender rules. I don't know.
Pew shows the top reason people now say they get married is love at 88%, followed by making a lifelong commitment at 81% and companionship at 76%. All of these involve you and your spouse. What are the actual reason for marriage? Like having babies and bringing them up, which as we'll discuss in a second, I will explain why this is the actual reason for marriage. Only 49...
No, that is historically. That is historically, like, it's for society. For society, of course, that's the reason for marriage. But again, you're basing this on this idea of, like, having this, again, this idea of this imposed duty on people rather than just letting people be free. It's a fundamentally anti-libertarian stance. As much as Ben Shapiro claims to be libertarian, he's actually not at all, because precisely he wants people to have this sort of coercive idea of society, and they sort of abide by this coercive idea of society.
Percent of people say they get married to have kids, and only 30% of people say they get married to have their marriage recognized in any religious fashion. Now, listen, love is great. I love my wife. Commitment is great. I am committed to my wife. The reason I married my wife is because she is the person not only I wanted to spend the rest of my life with, she's the person I wanted to build a family with and raise children with. And she felt the same about me.
Yeah, but again, that is just your own personal choice to have children. It's not like you shouldn't, because what you're saying is that, yeah, for civilization, sure, there needs to be procreation, but in any case, with basic income, again, you wouldn't even need to be married to have children. And again, the only reason that being a single parent is bad is because you're poor. And so with a solid basic income, that wouldn't be a problem anymore. So again, you're not actually using logic.
And that's
Okay, I'll say Ben Shapiro again uses faulty logic to defend oppressive traditional societal norms. I'll remove the traditional, just oppressive societal norms. Ben Shapiro again uses faulty logic to Ben Shapiro uses faulty logic to defend oppressive societal norms.
That's why we're 10 years in and going strong, thank God. With the change in how we see marriage as a mutually pleasurable arrangement as opposed to a goal-oriented partnership between two people. So are women happier after all of this? Right, this is the big question. Are we happier after all of this? Well, no.
Again, why? Yeah, but again, why base your happiness on making babies, especially when like the human population is growing a lot, and like it's actually literally better for society at this point if you don't make kids. Like literally, it would be better if you don't make kids. So please don't see like making kids as being a duty. Okay, that is ridiculous. I mean, again, this is the whole completely brain damaged logic of Shapiro, which like seems superficially like it's rational when in fact it isn't.
So it turns out Economists Betsy Stevenson and Justin Wolfers did a study on happiness trends among American citizens between 1970 and 2005. Now, 1970 is right around the time the radical feminist movement really starts to take over the country. What did they find? Well, it turns out men rated their overall life satisfaction higher than men in the 1970s. I wonder why. Might it have something to do with less commitment and more promiscuity? But what happened to women? Well, women's
But
happiness.
wait, at the same time, these people are saying, "Oh, men don't have any promiscuity anymore," precisely because like women all go to the top alpha males and stuff. Like, so which is it? Tell me. Yeah, I thought men actually were happier when they were more in stable marriages and had to be like committed. So yeah, what's the story? And yeah, obviously women are going to be less happy when you're like go from a situation where you can just lounge at home from then and then have to work. So, then that obviously. So again, indicating that basic income makes people happier and that freedom makes people happier.
Scores decreased. So men stayed relatively stable, but women's happiness scores decreased. I can't imagine how that happened. And the gap between male and female happiness actually is reflected in Europe too. So it's not just an American problem. This is a Western problem. Women are now getting married later than ever, median age 28. Divorce rates are increasing. Marriage rates are steadily declining. Is any of this really great for men or women? I would argue not. I would argue that it's actually a pretty negative impact on a lot of women. There are studies that show that of all the women who don't have kids, only 10% select not to have kids. When you ask women who are 45, 50 years old and never had kids, why didn't you have kids?
But again, it's not a duty. It's not a duty to have kids, and it's not. I wouldn't consider it a right to fundamentally have kids. I mean, I know obviously if you want to have kids, like okay, you should be allowed to, but I think we should maybe change that instinct so that people maybe not be so much driven to have kids. Um, I think that would be again something that would be a target for genetic engineering.
10% say I didn't want them, which means that a huge percentage of women who didn't have kids just couldn't. And not for biological reasons necessarily, right? Maybe because they got married too late, maybe because they were too invested in career. Life is a series of trade-offs, and if we fail to recognize that trade-offs exist, what you're doing is lying to people. Okay, so radical feminism hasn't just impacted marriage in negative ways, it's also impacted in really severe and negative ways motherhood and child rearing. The death of marriage wasn't just bad for women and men, it was really, really terrible for children.
This is why, again, the idea that Ben Shapiro is a libertarian is a complete joke. If he was a libertarian, he wouldn't be complaining about all about this thing.
Disconnecting marriage from children didn't stop kids from being born, it just meant that kids didn't have dads. Single motherhood is the single greatest barrier to intergenerational economic growth in the United States. It is not close. On average,
Yeah, but again, because of a faulty economic system. Like literally, you create a shitty system, and then people don't follow the rules of your system, and you say, "See you have to follow the rules, and it's your fault for not following the rules." But like literally, it's only because you decided those are the rules.
single motherhood damages children in irreparable ways, controlling for socioeconomic factors. The strongest predictor of doing prison time is single parenthood. Children from single-parent families account for 63% of all youth suicides, 70% of all teenage pregnancies, 71% of all adolescent substance abuse, 90% of homeless and runaway children. So while it may have been fun not to get married to that guy, it's not quite as fun when he's not around to help raise the kid.
Again,
But this is what the radical feminist movement was proposing. Remember, a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
again, only in a good society, women would not need
Unless it
that.
turns out that they're little fish. Then you might need another fish around to help take care of things. Single motherhood means that women themselves are trapped in poverty all too often. It's just bad for women. The poorest coterie in the United States
Yep, they are poor again because you're not giving them basic.
women are single moms. Now, radical feminists have a solution to this. They say, okay, just teach women not to have babies. That'll solve everything. Right? Then you don't have to worry about single motherhood. Just teach them that they don't have to have babies.
Yeah, and that's also true because that way population would go down, which for now is a very good thing. Just for environmental concerns. I know that you will say
This is
that's
what
crap.
Simone de Beauvoir, author of The Second Sex and existentialist
Beauvoir.
partner of Sartre, actually said. She said, quote, "No woman should be authorized to stay at home to raise her children." She says the government should ban people from staying at home to raise their kids. Society
Okay, I disagree with that. I think anybody who wants to stay at home to raise kids should be allowed to. And yeah, and in as much as people want to, of course, they should as much as possible be given. Look, the thing is that all those women who didn't have kids, you just get yourself artificially inseminated if you want a kid. Then you'll be a single parent. But like, again, if you got basic income, that would be fine.
should be totally different. Women should not have that choice. We should take away the choice. Why? Because if there is such a choice, too many women will make that choice. So you have radical feminists actually arguing that women should be restricted in their choices because radical feminists want women to act a certain way. I'm not saying that because I'm an actual feminist. I want women to be able to choose what they want to do. Radical feminists are saying...
But do you really? I question whether you really want that, because why in that case are you not supporting things like single motherhood?
Encourage women not to make their own choices. We have to discourage them from making choices we don't like, such as staying home with their kids more often. Except it turns out that women actually kind of like having babies, right? It's this notion that...
Yeah, they do. But again, if they just like having babies, maybe how about letting them have babies without requiring a man to be there?
Women don't want to have babies is so bizarre. Again, has anyone ever met a 35-year-old single woman? 35-year-old single women, there's some who choose not to be married. That's fine. The vast majority of women who are 35 and single are not supremely happy about being 35 and single and not having kids. Radical feminists then say that the priority, even if you have kids, is career. So what you should do is you should have a baby, and then you should go work someplace. You should make some money, and then you should pay some other lady to take care of your kid. That's the goal, right? And that's how it works in California, where I am from. And in California, the reason that illegal immigrant labor is so prevalent in suburbia is specifically because of this. You basically hire an illegal immigrant from a different country to come and mother your child while you go to work specifically, like you're making 50 grand a year and you're paying that 50 grand to another person.
Again, ironic, Ben Shapiro, supposedly pro-market, libertarian, complaining about illegal immigrants when actually illegal immigrants are a huge benefit for the economy. For instance, right there, it enables extra people to work, right? Like literally, it grows the economy. So if you're just a pro-economy person, you're pro-illegal immigration, okay?
To take care of your kid. Really, this is what's happening. Now, this is not actually what a lot of women want. This is why people talk about the gender gap, okay? The reason the gender gap exists in terms of income is because women choose to have babies and spend more time at home. This is the main driver of the gender gap, and that's not a bad thing.
That is true for the actual raw numbers of gender gap. Yeah.
I don't understand for the life of me why we are telling women that their best and greatest superpower, creating another human from their own body, is less important than working as an associate law clerk.
But again, the ironic thing is that you pretend like that is just a few people that are saying that. But by and large, you are totally jobist. You know, you're totally saying that this is the whole incredibly ironic thing of right wingers, is that they say, oh, you know, if you want to be able to survive, oh, you should have a job. And then they're saying, oh, left wingers are saying that everyone should have a job. Like, make up your mind already. Do you think everybody should be forced to have a job or not? Like, I think most people would really enjoy having the freedom of not being absolutely required to have a job. And so I'm firmly in the anti-jobist camp. I'm saying, yes, let's absolutely let women be just mothers and at home, but let's let them be even mothers even if they don't have a man. And also let men do the same thing, because what you're saying is basically you think that it's only okay to not have a job if you economically depend on someone who does. But why? Like, it makes no sense, because like literally you're only like the reason you believe in this, of course, is because you think kids need two parents. But then your only good argument for that is that single parents are poorer, and that is why it leads to poorer outcomes. But the only reason they're poorer, again, is because they don't have basic income. So again, like your whole thing doesn't hold ground. Like if from the moment that you institute basic income, there's no that line of argumentation just does not follow anymore. So yeah.
Working 2,100 billable hours, checking footnotes, is somehow more important than raising the next generation of human beings that you made with your own body and then bringing them up. Now,
I mean, just lol, you know, as people say, just LOL at Ben Shapiro, at right-wingers, pretending to be like anti-jobbers, pretending that it's somehow left-wingers that want people to work more. Just like that. Makes no sense.
Some people may choose that. Fine. Again, for the 1,000th time, that's fine. Do what you want.
You're the one who wants everyone to work. You want the one who wants to work to slave away you're the one who wants people to slave away, except if they're the wives of men who work. That is your entire that's your entire argument.
If you're going to indoctrinate women to believe that happiness comes from working as an accountant, but not from spending more time with your children,
It's so ironic that this is like exactly the same stuff that like Jordan Peterson is saying. And like it's funny because they pretend, they all pretend that they're like, "Oh, I'm classical liberal. Oh, I'm a libertarian." It's not true. They're full out deplorable rorks, right? And the thing is also they say, "Oh, I think for myself." I remember in this interview with Helen Lewis, Jordan Peterson, incredibly ironically, said, "Oh, from you all think like in the standardized fashion, you all think the same things. If you tell me one belief, I'll know everything else that you believe in." And it's incredibly ironic because a person like Jordan Peterson is exactly the same thing. One belief is his, every other belief.
there's not a single person who on their deathbed said, "I wish I had done one more doc review." Not one. I speak as someone who worked at a law firm.
Okay, and thank you for saying this because like you're just right there, you're completely dismantling your whole other line of argumentation when it comes to things like benefits for unemployment, when it comes to basic income, when it comes to any kind of anti-jobless policy where you say that, oh, people should have to really work hard and people should have to earn their living. And right there, it's so ironic. You're completely dismantling that argument, but because it's not, temporally at a different time, right? Because you're not saying it at the same time. People just completely forget that same argument would actually completely dismantle your argument when it comes to like discussing about leftist redistributive or safety net policies.
Now, in order to preserve
Man, you just complete mental dysfunction. Brain Shapiro, just complete. I'm surprised that he's actually even able to like remember his name. I mean, it's just so completely like dysfunctional. Like the inconsistency. Imagine just being able to constantly operate with this kind of inconsistency in your mind. Like I'm surprised it doesn't just make one's mind just blow a fuse or something. Apparently, it's possible, but it's amazing. It's amazing that so many people even are able to just function with such a high degree of mental illness.
the myth that work as an accountant is more important than the actual female superpower of creating individual humans with your own body and then nourishing them using your own body. Radical feminists have convinced men and women that the solution to all of this is abortion, that true feminism relies on abortion. What we really need to do is, obviously, if female empowerment means not having babies and not spending time with babies, then
Well, it's also just a contraception, not just abortion.
real female empowerment means killing babies, right? Just get rid of them.
Just a
Right? You got a baby in the womb.
contraception.
So
Contraception.
what? Your
Contraception.
autonomy is more important than that baby. Now, for the pro-choicers in the room, I don't care about your body. I'm not interested in controlling your body. I don't want any part of your body. I'm a happily married man. What I do want is for you to stop trying to carve apart the other body that's inside your body. Okay, that's what I
Yeah,
care
that is a very good argument, and that's why I always think that this thing about a woman's body isn't like you know like it's her own, and about a woman's choice to take care of her own body. It's silly because it's not just her body; it's more like another body specifically. Like it's another organism, right? So it's not just about you. If it was just about her, then of course abortion would be no big deal, right? If it was just like some sort of growth inside a woman, then that would be no big deal. But no, it's another organism, another then at a certain age, it's another consciousness, another soul. That is a huge big deal. It's like literally, it would be like the head of a household complaining that the government uh tried to make killing one's child illegal because it's like, oh, that's part of my body, extended body, including the house, and sort of like, oh, that the government's trying to regulate, me, my family, like my unit, and obviously that would be absurd, right? Um, that would be absurd, and that's why the line of reasoning that they use about choice and about autonomy and about control of women's body is it's a fundamentally wrong argument, and it's why you should never use that argument because it doesn't actually give weight to the question. It doesn't actually defend you. In fact, it speaks against you. Using that argument, it speaks against you because it shows that you don't understand the proper reasoning behind why one should support or oppose abortion. And the proper reasoning, of course, is just the minimization of suffering and the maximization of well-being. And so the proper reasoning is that abortion could actually minimize suffering by preventing people from having an unhappy life. That is the reasoning, and it's not a woman's autonomy to her body, because it's not just her body, it's also someone else's body.
About. I care about the other human in there. But radical feminists say, I'm not allowed to care about that. I'm a man. How can I say anything like that? How can a man have anything to say about the uterus? Because, as
Yeah,
we all know,
again,
logic just
it's yeah, and that's the thing. It's not about controlling women's uteruses. It's about controlling another organism.
simply stops if you're a man talking about this sort of thing. I mean, it's basically the same argument as saying you weren't a slaveholder in 1850s America, so how can you say anything about slavery? Stupidest argument in the world. Stupidest argument in the world. If a human rights violation is going on, if something that is morally harmful and irreparably harmful is going on, you have a duty as a moral human being to speak up about it. The carnage, by the way, since 1970, it's about 50 million unborn children in the United States terminated before birth. Okay, finally, a couple other notes. So, I want to get to the good part. Okay, so the best part is with regard to sexual.
But again, like most of the vast majority is at a pretty early stage, which again means that it would have been a very underdeveloped organism at that point, and quite likely just not even at all conscious and not at all there.
Obviously, because radical feminists have ruined sex. They've ruined sex. Okay. The feminist movement originally made a correct assessment. They made an absolutely correct assessment. Men were acting like pigs. I agree. Traditionalists said the same thing. Wow, that's human nature. Men act like pigs. Right, we know. That's why we created a civilization, to stop men from doing such things. Okay. Men were acting like pigs.
But if you recognize that, maybe why are you going to oppose people who say that maybe men should stop acting in the sort of harmful, typically masculine ways?
The feminists said that pornography, the pornography industry, treated women like meat and treated men to treat women like meat, which is also true. And then they said that men were being held to a double standard, which was also true. That men were not expected to hold themselves in or treat women with dignity, but women were expected to treat themselves with honor.
Yeah, but the thing is that, like, you're recognizing it now, but in fact, like, the problem is that the kind of mindset that goes with the stuff you're saying typically does tend to enforce those double standards. I mean, it just really systematically does that. Like, it's really rare to find a person who believes in this, like, in these sort of conservative ideals, and who doesn't, like, at the same time secretly, like, support men who like have lots of sex. It just really tends to go together. It tends to go together that they'll say, yeah, go for it, for men, and that they'll then shame women for having lots of sex. That is your typical right-wing mindset. So if you're not like that, congratulations, but most of them are, and most of them are going to feel in some way vindicated by what Ben says, even though he actually is not saying that.
Dignity. All of that was true. And then feminists did the stupidest thing possible. They said, what about if we just have women act like men? Not ask men to act like human beings, ask women to act like men. So men act like pigs, and we will act like men, and then everybody will be a pig together.
But that's not, again, that you're basically creating a straw man. You're mischaracterizing the whole thing, because people have been very much critical of the way men have been behaving. It's not like they're saying, oh, well, let's have everyone act like men. But it's also true that to a certain extent, there has been a tendency to sort of defend women acting in ways that they shouldn't. So he has a partial point, but he's also partially wrong.
It'll be great. And then they said, well, the porn industry, like, look at the flip from the feminists on the porn industry. It's just amazing. They went from, in the 1970s and 1980s, saying pornography is evil because pornography objectifies women, to now pornography is a sign of female empowerment.
But I think it's not they, it's like some feminists and some feminists. It's like some were for it, some were against it, and it's still the case.
Men will never stop laughing at how they somehow did this. Legitimately, men will never stop laughing at this joke. It is the greatest.
And I think this is anti-feminist to say that, because literally it's again saying that sex is inherently shameful for women, which means that which literally means that we should in fact shame women for having sex out of wedlock. And so that is exactly how it's going to like vindicate. Because if you consider porn to be exploitation for women, then why aren't you considering it exploitation for men? And so what you're doing is you're actually, in the guise of actually being concerned about women and concerned about equality and stuff for women, you're actually perpetuating double standards.
Prank ever pulled in the history of mankind, women somehow convinced themselves that pornography was empowering. There is not a man
Again,
alive who watches pornography who thinks, boy, there is a strong, independent lady.
I sort of disagree with that. Like honestly, like if you think pornography is not empowering, then sex is basically bad for women, which means I don't want to have sex with anyone at that point. Then it's also wrong to have sex with your wife. No, don't clap. Don't clap. And again, libertarian Ben Shapiro who wants to ban pornography.
Now, the lie was that women were going to be more sexually satisfied by this arrangement. You know, when they were married, they could only have sex with this one guy, and that was boring, and that was lazy, but now we can have affairs with whoever we want. We can have sex all the time. Yay, great. Only one problem. Only one problem. Virtually every study ever done shows that women have significantly more and better sex when they are in committed relationships. Women want intimacy in sex. They do.
I agree with that.
Okay, in a way that guys don't. All you have to...
But I also disagree. Like, it's not all women, it's not all men, you know. It's also that this is kind of an issue again.
If you want to ask a guy...
Like, again, the problem is that you're exactly doing what you accuse all these identity politicians of doing, is that you're just creating two categories and you're pretending that everyone is just a stereotype of that category, that all women prefer to be in committed relationships and that all women don't, and that all men don't, that all women, as I've been saying, like my new term for male humans, who are acting in sort of stereotypical fashions, don't.
Whether to have sex or not. If you ask a guy, do you want to have sex? His only question is, what time? If you ask a woman if she wants to have sex, you first have to ask her a different question.
Again,
Why?
Identity politics, right? You are doing identity politics by just putting people into categories.
Right, why? Like, women actually want to know why, which seems like a good question. But the feminist...
Again, Ben Shapiro complains about identity politics, engages in massive identity politics.
This movement suggested that why was a bad question. It should also be like men. It should just be when. Okay, the problem is that women don't actually treat sex like men do. They don't.
But some of them do. Some of them do.
Women want that intimacy, and if they don't get that intimacy, then they are confused and they are upset far more often than men. It's not true for every woman. But
okay, again, now finally you say it because you know the objection. But the problem is that what people are then going to remember is just that it is true for every woman, and I mean that's sort of what their mindset is going to be, and as a result, they're going to treat people unequally.
Average, women want a different thing from sex than men want from sex. For men, sex is much more about physical release, and for women, it's a lot more about emotional intimacy. Again, for evolutionary reasons.
Yes, I agree. Again, bringing up evolution when like half of your followers at least don't believe in evolution is also ironic.
And this notion that if you just cast away emotional intimacy and then you just have sex with random strangers, that this is somehow going to make your life better. I don't, like, my God, how did this, who?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want it either. I don't think, like, I'm pretty sure that lots of men don't particularly want just sex with completely random strangers. I mean, like I personally thinking about it, I'm not against the idea of having sex with like a completely random stranger, but I definitely would prefer to do it with someone, not necessarily someone that I knew well, but someone that at least I feel a certain connection with. It could be someone I met very recently, but I still just want to feel that we have a connection, you know, that yeah.
Who was able to perpetrate such a notion? It's unbelievable. It's idiotic for any number of reasons. Okay, first of all, women are more physically vulnerable than men.
But again, and like, who cares? What is your point here? Like, what do you exactly want to do about it beyond like regulating people's behavior? And that is actually what you want. Supposedly, libertarian Ben Shapiro actually does want to regulate people's lives. Like, why else would we be talking about this? Like, okay, if you don't want to have sex, well then just, or outside of the wedlock or whatever, then just don't do it. but don't like make it illegal or something, because that is basically like your only solution at this point is to make it like what else you're gonna do? What policy are we actually gonna implement beyond making it illegal? I don't know. Uh, Again, liberalism is not about saying you have to have sex outside of wedlock. It's just saying you should be allowed to.
You may have noticed this. Women are smaller and more physically vulnerable than men. And as we know, are far more often sexually abused. Do you think that women feel more comfortable or less comfortable in the presence of a stranger they just met 5 minutes ago who wants to have sex with them? What do you think? 28% of all rapes are committed by a stranger, another 45% are committed by an acquaintance, 25% are committed by a boyfriend or spouse. Okay, what this means is that marriage, relationships don't prevent rape, but they are also the vast minority of rapes in the country.
Vast minority is not like it's still it's still a quarter, which is not a vast minority. B, I'm sure there's lots of underreporting.
Men who are emotionally invested in their spouses may commit sexual assault against wives and girlfriends, but they do so less often than strangers do. And there are a lot more men in relationships than having sex with strangers. Second, the traditional standard for sex used to be
Yeah, there is a point about that, is that most women will be more often around like their own spouses, so like proportionally speaking, it would seem like strangers are more responsible for it, according to that data.
marriage, right? The societal presumption was that a woman didn't actually want to have sex with a man outside of marriage, so there was no expectation. And that expectation, you talk to a lot of young women, I talk to young women all over the country, a lot of them who feel, they will say that they feel pressured into sex by men. They feel like they have to have sex with men in order for the man to take them seriously. They feel like the man has an expectation of sex. Well, in a society where marriage is the barrier to sex, that expectation went unfulfilled because everybody basically assumed that was ridiculous. But in a situation where men expect sex and women feel pressure to give sex in order to generate a relationship out of it, that is not good for women. That's not good for women. Well, we got rid of all the sort of traditional notions of what you had to do before you had sex. You know, courting a woman. Yep.
Yeah, except that the traditional society also expected that a woman should just completely accept to have sex whenever the man wants to. You're conveniently like
Trying to
sort
form a
of
relationship with her,
hiding
making
that.
decisions about values, getting married. We got rid of all of those basic presumptions, and now consent is the only standard. And that sounds good, right? Consent sounds great, because we all like consent. Consent's awesome, right?
But it's much like literally you're defending the indefensible. You're literally defending that women just be the property of men and that makes them happier. And you're coming up with all this complicated argumentation, which superficially is right, but like you got to think why is Ben doing this? Why is Ben doing this? And what does he want to fundamentally promote? And what he wants to promote is that he wants to promote a reversion of just very conformist roles. And basically, if we're doing that, that means punishing people who don't follow that.
And in every area of life, consent is awesome. Well, there's only one problem. There's only one problem with this. It turns out that in matters of sex, there's some gray area when it comes to exactly how sexual relations work. That does not mean there's black and white area. Okay, so the black and white area is a guy wants to have sex, the woman says no, and then he violates her, right? That's black and white. We all agree that is a violation of consent. But what about when two people get drunk, go back to their dorm room, hook up? Was that some sort of sexual abuse? Was that a grave sin? Was that a rape? According to Title IX trials on campuses all over the country, it could be. That's why.
Yeah, and that is a problem. Is like if both people are drunk and there's this tendency to systematically portray the man as the aggressor, that is absolutely a mistake. Yeah.
They've now instituted yes means yes in California, which is this bizarre
And
standard.
it's completely anti-feminist also to like pretend that basically the men have all the males have completely all the responsibility about this, and that it's always a male trying to get sex from a woman, and to portray the woman as fundamentally you know bereft of agency and fundamentally always a victim, and it's completely anti-feminist.
Where
Yeah.
you're supposed to legitimately ask, like, I don't even know how you break down the gradations.
Yeah, and then there's this whole issue of yes means yes, and I also don't understand um how, like, obviously you can say like do you want to have sex, and then you say yes, and that's kind of it. But like so many times I get the impression that people would just have sex, and it's obvious that the other person wants to do it, but you don't necessarily have to say actually spell it out.
Right? The idea is supposed to be that you ask, okay, May I
Okay, but
kiss?
and then of course the question is why should and what they don't realize and what they're doing that's incredibly sexist, and it's sexist against women just as much as it is against women. It's sexist against females just as much as it is against males. Is that it's always implied that it should be the male that asks the female whether it's okay to have sex. It's never like if nobody asked about consent, if nobody like mentioned consent, they're never going to say like, oh, the female raped the male because the female didn't ask for consent before having sex. No, it's never like that. And you have to understand that is ultra sexist towards females, even more so than males.
You now? May I touch your leg? May I touch your shoulder? May I stroke your hair? It's like
Yeah, yeah,
Zeno's paradox. Like you have to get smaller and smaller in the areas of consent that you
yeah,
are asking.
yeah, and exactly that. Exactly that. That's completely nuts. That is completely crazy.
Right? There's a very funny bit in a Zoe Deschanel show, New Girl, where she's in high school and she wants to have sex with this guy she's been dating. It's prom night, and he's one of these guys, and he starts asking, "Can I kiss you? Can I touch your leg?" And eventually she says, "You can do whatever you want with me. Just stop asking me all the questions." And then he says, "You're being so aggressive with me. I don't know if I want to do this anymore." So she goes out and she has sex like the gardener, right? But the reality is that not a single sexual act has ever been consummated in this fashion. No one has a signed, notarized yes means yes checklist when they have sex. No one ever in history. And it doesn't sound all that sexy, to be honest with you. But this nebulous state
But
encouraging
honestly, I still don't know how you're supposed to do it. Like, it's still a mystery how you're like supposed to like have sex. I don't know. It just seems like this incredibly difficult, insurmountable thing to me. It seems like a completely parallel universe where one actually like manages to have sex.
promiscuity based solely on a vaguely defined consent where two people are drunk. Or a guy says, "Do you want to do something?" A girl says no, and then he starts kissing her, and then she says yes. Did she say no or did she say yes? Right? To pretend this stuff doesn't exist is to, again, blind yourself to reality in the name of political correctness. If all the lines were this black and white, I would agree with them. But they are not always that black and white. Heather
Yes,
McDonald reports
thank you for
today.
saying this.
In 2015, the Association of American Universities conducted a sexual assault survey at 27 selective colleges. The vast majority of survey respondents, whom the AAU researchers classified as sexual assault victims, never reported their alleged assaults to their college's rape hotlines, sexual assault resource centers, or Title IX offices, much less to campus or city police. Why? Because they self-reported they did not think that what happened to them was that serious. Right? So that means that a lot of the statistics about unreported sexual assault depends on the woman's subjective perception of what exactly is going on. Radical feminism has encouraged that sort of subjectivity and then
reaching
set
half
no
of this.
closing standard on the other end.
This
This
is gonna
leaves
be
women in
long.
a gray area and men in a gray area. It puts men in danger of being accused of things that they may not have done, and it puts women in danger of men believing they can push beyond boundaries of what is appropriate and normal. Radical feminism has undermined all of these things, again, based on that simple presumption that men and women are exactly the same. They are not. We all want to protect women. The only way that we can protect women and protect due process and protect the presumption of innocence is with some clear, actual, articulable standards. So what am I recommending after all of this? Well, I'm recommending a word that's kind of gone out of style these days between the sexes. Dignity. Men and women treating each other as individuals with honor, as creatures of God, everybody made in God's image. And it's your duty and your joy to honor and protect the person with whom you want to be intimate. Women treating themselves as worthy of that honor and demanding that honor from men. Like, that is what I am calling for. And if that sounds simple, that's because it actually is. It is not complex. Human nature is complex. Human nature is difficult. But
Again, he's sort of adding sort of religious ideas into this, and also sexist ideas, again, because it's sort of women that are demanding the honor from men and not the other way around. And of course, the God thing, which, of course, I disagree with, since I think God is a completely satanic concept.
setting moral standards is actually not that hard if you're committed to doing it. But if you're committed instead to tearing down those moral standards in the name of some brave new world, then of course you're going to end up in a really nasty gray area, which is where we are right now. What we
Yeah, no, but see, the problem is that he's also in his Brave New World stuff. He's also he's putting in some bad stuff, but also all sorts of good things.
require right now is a commitment to dignity and to honor, and that requires hard work and it requires a commitment to women. Most of all, it requires decency. And if we can all be decent to one another, then we're all feminists in the end. Thanks so much.
Okay. So I could just stop here, but I guess we'll have a look at the Q&A.
Alrighty, so now we're doing Q&A, which is the good part.
Q&A.
I brought my hammer just in case. So, as always, the rule is that if you are a person who disagrees, you go first. That's always the rule.
Speak louder.
Go around outside the back. Thank you.
You know, while we're waiting, can we just do
Yeah.
something? Let's give a quick round of applause to the security here, the police officers.
I don't disagree, but it is a it's just such a stereotypically right-wing thing to do, you
How's it
know.
going? I'm a huge fan of yours. And what I really wanted to say was I find it really hard to have a civil discussion with people from the opposite side because I want to learn more about their point of view, and sometimes they want to learn more about my point of view. What do you think the best way about going about kind of, having the groundwork, like, all right, let's present
I thought it was the people that were opposed that were supposed to talk
each other's
first.
side and actually discuss it and not let's devolve into a screaming match.
I mean, the first thing you have to do is you actually have to do a little bit of assessment as to whether the person you're talking to wants to have a conversation with you. Right? There are only a few reasons to have a conversation with somebody on the left. One is
Oh, I
to actually-
remember reading this. Yeah, he has this thing who he does this. There are only a few reasons to have a conversation with a person on the left. Like he like literally just considers all left-wingers like a complete crazy lunatic Satanists, when actually that is what the right are much more than the left.
have a discussion. You might find somebody on the left who actually wants to exchange ideas.
See, like I basically at that point, if he says that, I kind of stop wanting to exchange ideas with him and just want to insult him. But yeah, of course, I mean, to be fair, I feel the same thing as a right winger. I mean, I don't think it's worthwhile to like have a conversation with a right winger unless you think there's a good chance of changing that person's viewpoint. I don't think it's worth. I certainly don't think one should be friends with a right winger. So I mean, I actually agree with him, except from the opposite side.
Kind of rare, but it happens. You could also have a situation where you just want to hone your own ideas. So you're arguing for your own purposes, or you're debating somebody on a stage, in which case your goal is basically to humiliate that person as badly as possible. But you have to decide which conversation is which, and also
about Ben sort of being, the sort of super reasonable person who doesn't like insult people. Like I'm thinking about the previous thing where they said, "Oh, Chenko Igor was being rude to," as if Ben isn't.
You know this. I mean, everybody knows this, but they don't apply it. They get in a Facebook fight, and then 5 posts in, and an hour later, they're like, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that."
So
Like
ironic.
the first post. Is this the thing that's
So
going to help me, or is this the
ironic,
thing that's just a waste of
Ben.
time?
Ben,
I
you're
don't
such
know if
an
If I
idiot.
can ask afterward. Can I take a picture with you after the conversation?
I'll try to stick around as long as I can. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yuck. Yuck. I want to barf. I want to barf.
Again, I'm 14 years old. I'm a huge fan. I'm from Rochester. And I'm a conservative, and the New York Public
He's 14. You're like literally. What? Wait, 14? But this is at the university? And he like has a lower voice than me. Yeah, that's
school education system makes it really hard for me to spread my conservative viewpoints, like my friends, my community. And as you can see, my shirt says Ben Shapiro 20. And I was just
Oh, thank God that didn't happen. Thank God.
wondering if at any
Thank
point in the
God.
future, could we possibly see you running for office of any kind?
So a few years ago, I probably would have said yes, because it was something I was interested in. Watching as public figures get absolutely destroyed personally, it makes me less likely to do it. I think our politics is such right now that decent people, and I try to consider myself decent, decent people are sort of being driven out of the public square. People who have no shame or honor, I think, are being encouraged to run for office on every side of the aisle. I could see a possibility sometime in the future. It won't be in 2020. But I appreciate the sentiment.
All right, thank you.
Hi, Ben. I'm a freshman at UB from Dutchess County. You talked about divorce rates and how divorce rates have been increasing in this country since the 1970s, and just kind of alluded to that as evidence of the failure of radical
Well, they
feminism.
sort of leveled off since like the 2000s, like the early 2000s. But yes, they're still higher than they were in the 50s and 40s.
Right. Couldn't that also simply be because of the fact that women are now more socioeconomically able to be independent than men? Like, how can you
Yes,
say that
thank you.
radical feminism caused divorces and
Yeah, it's maybe that women who just didn't dare getting divorced because of like the, not only the fact that they might become destitute, but also the fact that they'd be shamed by their whole community would like, be a sort of factor in their not wanting to get divorced. How about that?
also ignore the fact that possibly it was just that women became able to be independent, therefore they started to divorce more?
Because they would be becoming economically independent in the same period as they were getting divorced, as they were getting married. Meaning that these aren't 20-year marriages that are breaking up. These are like 5-year marriages that are breaking up, which suggests to me a mental shift that's taken place in the nature of how we.
Oh, so wait, so what he's saying is that the people who were married at the time didn't get divorced when finally they were able to? Like what or is he saying that the women who were like young in the 60s or something and who then were old like in the 90s or something, they didn't get divorced, so that is the reason why it's not what the questioner asks. Um, but it could also be just that then it's an ingrained mindset that, one does not divorce. But it still doesn't necessarily mean that. So, okay, maybe like the actual individual women just still don't have this idea of divorcing when they have the opportunity. But then also is that if you've gotten old, then obviously, you don't have as many financial opportunities. So I still see that as, again, I think it's faulty reasoning. But is that really what he's saying? I'm not entirely
Think
sure.
about marriage rather than socioeconomic status being the indicator.
But
Meaning that I suppose that economics could tie into this, except for the fact that people who are higher income tend to stay married more often than people who are lower income.
Yeah.
Right? So
Okay.
that's sort of.
Okay, so yeah, so he's saying that it's actually not just for economic reasons that one stays married. Um, but is it higher income themselves or is it higher income from their spouse? Because that would make a significant difference. For that argument to be logical, it would have to be themselves. Um, so in that case, that Ben would be right. In that case, Ben would be right. Um, so yeah, but it's like it's if people are getting divorced, it's obviously that they're not super satisfied. I mean, why is it even like who cares? Fundamentally, if you're like a libertarian, if you just want a system that's simple, why don't you just actually be okay with divorce?
Undercuts the argument a little bit. Meaning that if you're richer, you tend to be married longer on average. People who are poorer tend to get divorced
Where
more
did you get that statistical
The
trend
Census
from?
Bureau.
I just hate that kind of aggressive like laughing and applauding when it comes from the deplorable subhumans. Like I literally just want to punch all of them.
Hi, Ben. I just want to say I'm a huge fan of the show. I got the mug. I'm a subscriber.
Awesome. It's been overflowing this week. The leftist tears hot or cold tumbler.
I never have to fill it up. The question I wanted to ask is, after the whole, I guess there's no better way to put it, but debacle involving the appointment of Justice Kavanaugh to the bench, do you think this is a moment where Americans, as a society, are going to start to maybe come back together and try to establish norms, or is this just a moment where our politics are just going to further polarize and we're just going to start to tear it apart even harder at the seams?
Yes,
Number one,
but
I
it's
love your
mostly
optimism.
your fault.
It's
mostly
I'm
your
by nature
fault.
a pessimist, which means I'm always right eventually. So it's so. My feeling is that when you see people who are screaming and trying to pry open 13-ton bronze doors in front of the Supreme Court as Brett Kavanaugh is being sworn in inside, and then you have full editorials in the New York Times saying that white women are racist because they supported Brett Kavanaugh, which I just don't even understand. I don't think this rift is going to be healed anytime soon. In fact, I think that The book
Yeah,
that
well, it's not because you're acting like complete idiots, and yeah, the lefties are being idiotic too.
I'm right that I have coming out next year is largely about why this giant rift has opened up in America in a time when we are historically wealthy, when we really don't have
Yeah, and the reason for that is precisely because you don't have a common enemy, and you feel the need to invent enemies when you don't have one. Like just literally just feel the need to create a common enemy, and the reason for that is because you're idiots, and that's partly a consequence of your biology, which is again a consequence of an idiocy which was also created by this Gorth, and so the Gorth basically makes you idiotic through this process of accumulation of soul cred, and that actually then influences also evolution. And so then you'll also, because of that soul cred, that will favor the more idiotic people being more successful biologically. And so you'll actually have that fundamentally Gorth caused, but then more approximately biologically determined idiocy on top of the more immediately Gorth caused idiocy through the process of soul crud, plus the actually even more immediate influence, direct influence of the Gorth, which could directly at any time influence your emotions
major foreign crises on our hands.
and beliefs and
We
etc.
don't have a lot in common anymore, is the sad truth. I mean, a nation is defined by a common history,
No, it's not really even yeah, but it's defined by complete idiocy. Really, I mean that is really the biggest problem.
a common culture, a common set of
And again, and the problem is again, he says that nations defined by this common stuff, and again, internationally, that is very much a problem. I mean, globally, we need to have a common sense, a set of values, and that is why I'm fundamentally opposed to differences both like within a country like that and also between countries. So that is again why we need a single global society. Um, and of course, you can't have the kind of rift, like people would say, oh, but then you have the kind of rift that you see, in the United States. But look, there are plenty of like African countries that are composed of tons of different ethnic groups, and yet they still work okay. And actually, they say that the ones that have more ethnic groups are less violent, precisely because none of them can gain ascendancy over the other ones. Um, so I think it's perfectly possible to have a global society, even if they're different, ethnic groups. And the most important thing is that just everyone can agree on the same basic principles, and those same basic principles are essentially the three pillars of ethics. That I said is omnibeneficence, freedom, and fairness, equity, right? And so those are the three basic principles. And so what pretty much everyone I think can agree. So like omnibeneficence would just be like maximizing well-being for everyone, and so that includes so most importantly for policies like material well-being, and so that would imply just maximizing economic productivity, but of course with minimizing the influence on the environment, of course. So maximizing material well-being without harming the environment excessively. So I think everyone can agree on that, but the problem is that um, yeah, I don't think anybody disagrees with policies that would maximize economic productivity. Um, but then I'd say I mean where people disagree is more on the question of like freedom and fairness, and basically like Republicans, right wingers in general, claim to like defend freedom and fairness, but actually they are the ones who are most opposed to freedom and fairness. Though I definitely agree that like with lots of this identity politics stuff, left wingers think they're caring about things like that, but actually they also aren't. So it's important to bear in mind that I mean both sides definitely make mistakes. But what you would need is again, if you believe in freedom, you don't have any of this kind of government interference in like how much sex you can have outside of wedlock or something. So obviously what you need is complete tolerance of homosexuality, complete tolerance of female sexuality, complete tolerance of transgenderism and such, and even of course a complete tolerance of things that are taboo pretty much for everyone, which includes like teen sex and sex with other species, again, because it just makes no sense to regulate. It's antithetical to the principle of freedom. And of course, if you believe in freedom, you have to eliminate all borders, and you have to provide a basic income so that people have the freedom to choose whether to work or not. So that's freedom. And then equity, fairness, well, so that you give everyone the same basic income, right? And you also limit the amount of income that one can obtain through the
goals,
free
common
market.
institutions.
Oops. And so that implies having a maximum income. And So I mean, just based on those ethical principles, you need all those things. You need elimination of borders. You need a single global basic income, which means a single global society. Like basically, just based on the basic fundamental principles of ethics, you actually can determine what society we need, and what we need is what I'm proposing, which is this universal society, a single universal society with a single unitary government at the top, which of course we'd have to ensure as best as is absolutely possible to avoid any uh, you know co bad concentrations of power. But you need that. It obviously has to be like democratic for again the principle of fairness. And then economically, so you need this single global basic income, single maximum income, single global tax scale. Um, and yeah, and obviously like a single currency, and that's it. That's kind of the plan, and that's the obvious thing. It just stems from the basic principles of ethics, and of course, none of this conservatism stuff. Nobody's saying that you can't have a traditional family. It's just saying please don't force people to have one. Please don't punish people for not having one.
All of those things are being torn asunder by serious divides that we have about how we view our own central principles. And we used to be unified by a belief in God-given rights and limited government. Obviously, that doesn't unify us. We used to be unified by belief in Judeo-Christian virtue. That no longer.
And I don't. Again, you're focusing on this God stuff, but like the Enlightenment values were largely, based on criticism of traditional religion, and that is sort of what makes the United States better. And France then even went further in its own revolution with that. And unfortunately, then there's the Restoration that kind of killed that, and already Napoleon that sort of, to some extent. But you know, um, this God again, God, no, God is like pre-American stuff.
Unifies us. We used to be unified by a belief that America was essentially a good place, even though we'd never lived up to our full promise. Even that, I think, is no longer a unifying principle, which is why we now have people who see American history as in Howard Zinn fashion. It's just a long history of suffering and pain and patriarchal.
But to a large, I mean, it wasn't entirely, but there was a lot of that. And the problem is that the people on the right just systematically want to deny that.
Institutional discrimination. If those gaps don't get bridged, I think that we're headed toward a schism that is going to grow larger and larger over time. I don't see how. The only thing I could see is that eventually, just disgust with the way this works means that, forget politics, somebody who's felt to be fundamentally decent ends up running for office, and you get a spate of those people running for office, and then it's about voting for the decency of the people as
Yes.
opposed to a particular political
Yes.
agenda.
Vote for Ellism. Vote for the universal society, universal movement.
Thank you so much for coming.
Hello, Ben. How are you doing tonight?
Doing okay, how are you?
All right. So I'm a liberal, and
Well, thank you for
also-
coming, I appreciate it.
Yeah, but at the same time, on the topic of free speech, I consider myself a libertarian.
That's why you're a
So-
liberal and not a leftist. You see, whenever I do my speeches,
Right.
it's always liberal versus leftist. Liberals are people who disagree with me on politics, but aren't trying to attack me with machetes.
Yeah, but like lots of leftists aren't actually like necessarily into that identity politics stuff either. I mean, it's not often the more identity politics, the people who focus exclusively on identity politics might not actually be even that leftist economically. So again, it's a sort of mischaracterization. There's lots of different types of liberals, lots of different types of leftists. Yeah.
And leftists are people who disagree with me on politics and are trying to shut down my speeches.
All right. So what I wanted to ask you about. So me personally, I disagree with many social networks move to ban Alex Jones from their platforms, and I think it's a
Yeah,
violation of.
I agree with that. Just because I get normally I agree with the freedom of businesses to do whatever they want. But I also realize that, when businesses basically tend to end up in positions of a monopoly, and when businesses do that, uh, what happens is that at that point you don't really have the freedom to go to another business who doesn't do like something that you don't like, and as a result you're basically stuck when you're deplatformed. And so, which is why I think that major businesses that have a somewhat monopoly position should be allowed to have government interference. I mean, one should be able to have the government interfere into their practices. And this is very ironic because actually Republicans have now called for this very thing, when at the same time, normally they claim to be anti-government, they claim to be anti like government interference in business, but once again, this proves to not be true.
The spirit of the First Amendment. But in comparison with that, I was asking, would you agree with me that by the NFL stopping Kaepernick from kneeling, is that also a violation of the First Amendment, the spirit of it in some sense? And do you believe that a corporation has the right to do what it wants, knowing about that first?
So there are several actual questions. Number one, do corporations have the right to do what they want? Yes, Facebook and the NFL have the right to do what they want, right? They're private corporations, they do. Now, the more important
like, so there's an argument for that as well. I mean, I could understand why he agrees with that, but I think because of the monopoly rule, I think it's better to have a bit of government interference just in a limited amount, just where it's deemed necessary.
Question is the first one you asked about sort of the spirit of the First Amendment. I think that the real question is what these corporations are designed to do. So social networks were originally designed to facilitate discourse between various political sides. That's what they were designed to do. The NFL was not really designed to do that. The NFL presents a product, right? The NFL's product is what is on the field. If the NFL were to fine people for stuff that they said on Twitter, then I would suggest that the NFL was doing something wrong. For the NFL to say you're affecting our viewership and the product that we present, that's a different thing. Just as if Alex Jones worked for CNN and he went on air and he started talking about, Satan, get behind me. I'm unbuttoning my shirt now. Look at this. Underneath I got another shirt. Right, if he started doing that routine on CNN. If he started doing that routine on CNN, I think at that point CNN has every right to do whatever they want with him. So for the corporate question, the question is, what is the corporation designed to do? And the lie of Facebook and Twitter was that they were basically going to be essentially free open networks for discourse, and then it turns out that they're more publishers. They're more like my site or CNN, right? Trying to add editorial guidance. What I think is that Facebook and Twitter, if they want to ban people, they should do so based on threats of violence, actual legal slander. Like that's where they should draw the line, not add stuff we don't like because Alex Jones is a nutball.
So can I have a quick follow-up, if you don't mind? Just
sure.
So then, would you disagree with perhaps Tim Tebow's right to kneel in prayer on the field?
Yeah, if they'd find him for kneeling in prayer on the field, then they would have every right to do that too.
All right, thank you very much.
Hi, Ben. I want to start off and say I'm a huge fan of yours and would love the possibility to get a picture with you. And that, I'm truly hoping you run for presidency in 2024, although if you wanted to secure my vote during your campaign, then by some absolute miracle, I'd have to see you defeat Ocasio-Cortez in the debate. But
I don't know. Stop catcalling her, dude.
Yeah. But that brings me to my question. With college campuses becoming increasingly overwhelmed by professors with leftist teachings and rhetoric, I, like many other young conservatives, feel my back against the wall and not wanting to share my conservative views, especially on sensitive subjects, for running the risk of being ostracized by a mob of my classmates. What sort of advice would you give to this?
So my advice has always been to be practical, meaning that you have to decide what the risk-benefit analysis looks like exactly, the cost-benefit analysis. So when I was in law school, there were certain professors who were really great about debate. And people on the left who really enjoyed the fact that we go back and forth. And that was wonderful, I enjoyed it. And then there were certain professors who weren't. And those were the professors where I'd basically keep quiet because my grade was more important to me than making a point everyone was going to forget 20 seconds later. If I wanted to talk to students outside of class, I would do it then. That's always been my view. I've never felt like you need to sacrifice your grade or sacrifice your future to make a point in class that everyone is going to forget 15 seconds later, except for the professor who's going to grade you down. The best path is to speak truth whenever possible, and when not possible, don't. Get good grades, make lots of money, threaten to withhold alumni funding, and because discrimination in the classroom obviously shouldn't be approved by the administration.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks.
I don't know if I should keep watching this because
Hey Ben, I'm a big fan. I met you during the meet and greet when you came here earlier, and you touched on the issue of abortion. And I'll just like to ask a question because I did a debate on abortion in high school, even though I don't necessarily agree with it. I was on the pro side, and I actually took it as an opportunity to learn from the other side. And although I can say one of their main talking points was how if abortion was made illegal, then people would just get illegal abortions, and then twice the amount of people would die in the instance of that. But then I also said, well, that's not my issue. My issue is with how it's almost weaponized, like to say like the left kind of weaponized it, where it's like if you don't agree with abortion, like abortion is this amazing thing, an amazing right, an amazing power. But then I'm like, it's actually a really tough decision. It's not something I'm going to go celebrate and say I'm really like it's awesome, it's a beautiful thing. And like, how do you think the left did that? Like, how do you think?
Well, I think the left actually came to a logical realization, which is that safe, legal, and rare is an untenable political position. So that was the Clintonian position in the 90s. They said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Well, when you say that it should be rare, you're undercutting safe and legal, actually, or at least legal, right? Because the problem is, if you say it's rare, you're acknowledging that there is moral content to the action you are taking, which raises the question as to why it should be legal. Right? So in other words, if it's what the left says and it's just removal of a polyp, why should it be rare? I don't think polyp removal should be rare. I don't think anyone else believes that either. But when the left acknowledges there's a moral content to what it is that they're doing, they get themselves into a rhetorical trap. So instead it turns into shout your abortion, be proud of your abortion. Right? Be proud that it was like a step into womanhood to get an abortion. And anybody, I think, with any moral sense can see how terrible that is. But the left has made, people who are left on abortion have made a crusade.
But I think it's still possible to have a middle ground. You can say, you recognize that it's problematic, but that it's still overall better. Like even though it's like obviously an imperfect solution.
Sacrament out of abortion in a way that they hadn't even when I was, in high school. So it's pretty incredible and pretty horrifying, and that's why I've always thought. I mean, on Fox, I did my election special on Sunday, and on Fox, I did a monologue at the very end of the show about abortion.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the monologue on abortion, I think the best way to fight against the pro-choice position, the pro-abortion position, is to actually just show pictures of what it is that this baby is. Okay, because there's not a single Democrat in the Senate or in the House of Representatives that I know of who would vote to save a baby at the 12th week or 14th week. That's nuts. That's nuts. You can feel the baby kicking. I know. I've had two of them. This is crazy.
Oh yeah, he felt it through the yeah. But you don't. Apparently the first time you feel it kicking is at 14 weeks of amenorrhea, which is 12 weeks after the conception. And so typically the cutoff in many countries is at 12 weeks of amenorrhea, 10 weeks after conception. So you wouldn't feel the baby kicking at that point, which is why I think it's a good cutoff point. But yeah, if I could understand to bring it down to like a month earlier than that. Less than that, you just don't really have the time. I mean, but if you look at, it's pretty interesting. You can look at the age at abortion. And you could also, in any case, uh, up to like 4 weeks after conception, there like literally isn't any brain at all. Okay, so like basically, 6 weeks of in the sort of just official gestational age of which is 6 weeks of amenorrhea, you don't even have a brain. So obviously there isn't any consciousness there. So I mean, like to me, there's really no issue with abortion up until that age. But obviously then it's that's the 12 weeks of amenorrhea, 10 weeks after conception is considerably more. So I could understand potentially that someone would want to bring it down to that much, but then the problem is that lots of women just wouldn't have the time to know they're pregnant because they'd literally just like be missing their period for like so they'd have 2 weeks after being late on their period to abort. See, that's not enough time. So you need like a minimum. I think you need a minimum of a month for that, which would mean to bring down the period of basically, I could see bringing the abortion time down to 2 months of amenorrhea, so like 1.5 months, like 6 weeks after conception, so a month earlier from what the limit is in many countries. I could go along with that definitely. Um, a age uh gestational age abortion images. So here, here's a chart. I don't know where this is from, but look here's uh okay, so this is in England and Wales. So, I mean, if in England and Wales they can do this, they can do this anywhere, right? So, sorry, that might have sounded bad for England and Wales, but like, obviously you have nothing up until 2 weeks because 2 weeks is literally just conception, right? Because that is 2 weeks and even 3 weeks is conception. Because that this is the zero is the like your last menses, right? So it starts here at in the between weeks 3 and 4, between 3 and 4 weeks. So what you'd call the fourth week, and then it goes up steadily and it peaks between week 5 and 6, and then it goes back down quite quickly. And so you can see that, in fact, it's at between gestational age 9 and 10, it's already much lower. So and so often the limit here is this one here, the in the green, where the green ends. That's often the limit. But I could envision bringing that down to a gestational age that is lower than that. Gestational age that is down to that would actually end up here. So you would eliminate where including where I've got the plus right now. So that would be a big column. So if you wanted to, take let those people abort, then you'd bring it up there, and so that would be 9 weeks gestational age, 7 weeks after conception. So we could bring it down. That would be about the lowest. This limit here at the 8 would be the lowest that I would be okay with bringing it down to. Because then, well, here you've got the bulk of abortions, and these are mostly people who need it. And look, at this point, the baby is really not particularly developed yet. Um, so, so I mean, this is uh, you're going to have lots of, unwanted pregnancies, which can then lead to, unhappy mothers, unhappy fathers, unhappy children, and just unhappy lives of the children who are born from this. And so that's why I support the right to abortion. And so, but I recognize that's a problem. And see, the age of viability is here, 22 weeks, sort of cut off. So you can see that basically that's sort of when abortions like really taper off completely. Although there are always still a few that will happen afterwards, but that'll be more like as a result of not being, as a result of a danger, right? The risk to the to the mother to the mother's life or health. Um, so basically, an abortion from this age here would actually constitute infanticide. And so you can see that's actually only halfway into the whole pregnancy. So like literally that at that point the baby is potentially viable. And so the conception, remember, is actually here. So yeah, it's just like halfway through. So that's my take on it anyway. Um, so yeah, yeah. Let's go back.
Yeah, crazy talk. And the facts and the science happen to be on our side. One of my pet peeves on this issue is when people say, oh, you only say that because you're religious. You only say that because of the Bible. I have never invoked the Bible or God in any argument about abortion.
Yeah, I get that a lot too.
It's idiotic. It's idiotic. It's a way for them to avoid the necessary scientific.
Yeah, no, well, see, I don't, well, I know lots of people do invoke the God thing, and they invoke the God thing more specifically for the really early embryo stage to like advocate against, doing research on embryos. And I agree that it is actually sort of it is somewhat morally problematic, but a lot less so because at that point, there obviously cannot be a consciousness since there is literally no brain. Okay, so it's just a potential, something that could turn into real human. So it is disturbing. But I mean, if you think about potential, then at that point, you could also say it's wrong to not have unprotected sex whenever you have the opportunity, because you're literally avoiding to have the opportunity to create a person, right? And so like literally, it's a person that could end up existing and that you're voluntarily not creating, and which means that you should just have sex, like with any, like as a male, you should just try to have sex with any woman who isn't already pregnant and who is fertile. So that, I mean, that would be the logical argumentation there. So I think it makes sense to be able to abort up to relatively early stage.
Conclusion from the fact that human life begins in fertilization. They don't want to talk science, so they accuse you of being a religious bigot, even though you're actually.
No, but yeah, but why do you believe in that? It's still because of religion. Of course, human life, yes, starts at fertilization. Consciousness does not start at fertilization because you literally don't have a brain. Consciousness at most would start at 4 weeks. At that point, you'd have literally the consciousness of like an insect or something, right? So I mean, it's not really a great argument. Um, like, of course, there's the issue that like being obviously like murder would represent a trauma for the soul, and like because I've explained in this thing that I believe in this sequence of incarnations and that people tend to accumulate trauma over incarnations, and I think it's quite likely that aborted children, you know, fetuses, would carry on the trauma of their abortion into subsequent incarnations, and that would actually be the strongest argument for me against abortion. And so I've been trying to think about like what age is the most likely that uh the fetus is first able to experience trauma. And again, well, for me, it definitely has to be at least 4 weeks just for there to be a nervous system, and a brain, especially like just for there to be a brain. And uh even even like for a few weeks after that, there still isn't like a properly functional brain where you've got like proper uh I mean, it's obviously still very, very different from even like a pretty primitive vertebrate. And so, like, yeah, I'd say up until probably like 6 weeks, there probably isn't any consciousness. And then then there's a whole gray area. My guess is that there definitely is consciousness when you start to feel the kicking, and so that can start at like 12 weeks after conception, 14 weeks gestational age, and so. So the question is like between those times, is there consciousness? Is there not? And that is where I don't really know. So ideally, you'd avoid any abortions that have where there's already consciousness uh, inside the the fetus.
Actually not invoking
I
God.
do hate that when they just say it's a clump of cells. That's just
What I say
disingenuous.
is
But it is like literally it is just it's going to turn into something else, but you're still thinking in a religious fashion when you say it's a clump of cells. I mean, when you complain about it being considered a clump of cells, like it is just a clump of cells, um, like literally, like it's not. There's no brain. Okay, there's no brain. That there's nothing there.
you are technically a clump of cells as well.
Just a walking
Yeah, but no, but you are exist as you because of your brain.
Because
like
they are.
bunch of
You're,
tissue.
you're a slightly more developed clump of cells, but that doesn't mean that like none of
Yeah, but like, and of course, then, Ben, if you're gonna say a clump of cells, how about like a cow? A cow's a clump of cells. It has a lot more consciousness and a lot more capacity to experience pain and suffering than just a less than 1 month old embryo. So, like, why are you okay with killing cows at that point? See, it doesn't, you're not, again, Ben Shapiro pretending to be logical, but actually not. Because I bet that Ben Shapiro thinks that, like, veganism is also some sort of weird liberal sort of degeneracy.
the other arguments hold. The viability argument doesn't hold. There are plenty of human beings who are not viable outside of outside support from machines or a pacemaker. We don't suggest that they can now be terminated.
Yeah, but the viability argument makes sense. Just I mean it is one mach and anyway the machine thing already we're often saying that we actually should terminate support, and typically the reason when we say terminate support is because there's no functional brain power. So actually what determines what's okay is really the brain. So certainly the first 4 weeks there's no like problem with abortion. And then, like I said, the gray area is sort of between, between that and when there's like the first movement, I think.
There are lots of people who don't have proper brain function. And babies.
Yeah, lots of people who don't have proper brain function, but uh, like we're not even talking about just improper brain function. We're just talking about like brain absence. Like the first 4 weeks after conception, first 6 weeks of gestational age official, there is no brain. It's not there's poor brain function. There is no brain.
Or fetuses or embryos, which are going to develop proper brain function, to suggest that those babies are somehow lesser because of improper brain function for a temporary period, not even for a permanent period. That is obviously
yeah, but it's still, yeah, like I can understand that, but still there is no current suffering. Like, okay, you've got this potential to become a human that with brain function, but you don't actually exist yet in any way, right? And like if you're gonna be based on like how if you're gonna base yourself on this idea that yeah, this is gonna turn into human and we should give this person every opportunity to do stuff, like why again, why are you so callous about like the suffering of people in other countries? Why do you support nationalism?
Aspersions of people who don't necessarily have full brain function. It's very difficult to make an intellectually consistent case for why abortion ought to be treated as morally ambiguous. I have a tough time with it, frankly.
Thank you, man.
But I'm hoping you're realizing that I'm not just being blindly pro-abortion. I'm really trying to maximize. So, like I mentioned, this idea of trauma. I believe in reincarnation. I don't completely believe in it. I believe it's just the hypothesis I find most plausible. So, for practical purposes, I believe in it. But I'm willing to accept that may be wrong. And and again, what I think about, is the trauma that one can accumulate over successive lifetimes. And I think, like, maybe an abortion, okay, it'll create the trauma of being aborted if you're aborted at a late enough stage. If you're aborted right away, then I don't think there would be any trauma. But if you're aborted later on, then yes, I think there would be trauma. But you might still avoid even more trauma that might have happened just through living out your regular life that you would have had if you weren't aborted, considering that like you were an unwanted child, especially, and like the trauma of that. So that's the sort of analysis. That's the way I'm thinking about it. That's the kind of reflections that are going on in my mind to try to weigh on the good or badness of abortion.
So I'm Robert. I'm one of the coastal liberals, as you'd say. I've been watching you for years now, and I read your book on the arguments to fight against people like me, and I feel bad because for the most part, the people who have been arguing against you aren't nearly as elegant or eloquent as they should be. But I would just like to ask. So one of your points you very strongly make is that it's unfair for people like me to label you as like a racist or a bigot, just as like a smear tactic. But have you ever acknowledged that maybe it's not a smear tactic, but it's based on things you've said? So for example, on the Israel-Palestine conflict, you called the Arabs. Yeah, you already know what I'm going to say. I'm sorry. No, I didn't mean to presume. Yeah. So you say.
I've written several full columns about it.
Yeah.
I've talked about how people don't read the follow-up tweets. I wrote a column.
I've read some of the tweets, and the tweets were just as bad. I mean, you say a lot of things that are just racist. Right, but then if I call you a racist, then you defend it by saying I didn't read enough, right? So what I was going to say before.
So give me fine. So give me my racist tweets in context.
Okay, well.
Yeah, you came prepared. So right, go do it.
So you said the Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult. You before that said Israelis like to build.
Did you? Okay, now the follow-ups, because you said the follow-ups didn't make it any better.
Well, this is separate things that you said.
No. I want
the
follow-ups to that one though.
Follow-ups to that specific.
Would you like me to
tweet?
get them? I'll get them for you.
If you have them, sure. But in the meantime, do you mind while you do that?
What was that?
Do you mind if I continue while you do that?
Well, I'd like to take them one by one. So
sure.
Okay. Why don't we do this? Why don't we delay that one until the end while I look this up from the podium in front of 600 people?
You've also said. Okay. I'll wait. So on that particular issue, you've also said that the Arab-Palestine populace is, by and large, constitutes the most evil population on the face of the planet. Before you said that you've never brought up religion when it comes to abortion, but I don't think that you've avoided religion when it comes to the Israeli conflict. And I don't know that you can be completely unbiased in the issue, given that,
Well, I can be unbiased on the subject that the Palestinians have elected 3 terrorist governments to form a unity government with the stated goal of the destruction of the state of Israel and the murder of all Jews in the area. So that I can be relatively unbiased on. As far as the idea that the Palestinian population... As far as
but again, we're not saying, like, the problem is that, the Arab Palestinians are pretty shitty. The problem is that the Jews are as well, and that, again, Ben is conveniently ignoring, and all these people clapping are also conveniently ignoring.
The idea that the Palestinian population is more evil than other populations. They certainly hold more evil views than other populations by poll statistics, by how many Palestinians approve of terror attacks, by how many Palestinians voted for an actual terror group, Hamas, and another actual terror group, Palestinian.
Yeah, but again, it's like when you consider their circumstances of being oppressed by Israel, it kind of is, understandable. And this is coming from someone who's like ultra critical of, not just like Islamic terrorism, but Islam as a religion and a culture in general. I hate it. Like, I hate it. But still, if they hold like if they have more support for terrorism, like, big surprise. Like, guess why? It's like they are being constantly oppressed by Israel, and that is also true. That is also true.
Authority and another actual terror group, the Islamic Jihad. Okay, so I don't think that all views are equal, and I don't think that people who hold evil views are necessarily good. I mean, I'm sorry if the polls don't...
Yeah, and I agree with that, but funnily enough, Ben Shapiro believes in nationalism, which, as I've explained before, is not really fundamentally separable from what we call Nazism. So, yeah.
Support the idea that everyone is equally wonderful, but everyone is not equally wonderful. Okay, I'm looking up these statements now, so if you'd like to give me a second.
But you've continued, you deny secular Zionism, and you...
Quote, okay, so here, I've got them in front of me. Okay, so I'll finish that one, then we can move. Okay, ready? There are many, many Christian and Muslim Arabs who are wonderful people, just not the ones who oppose Israel in the Israel-Arab conflict.
That is not great, because, like, Israel is not a nice entity, nor is Palestine. They're both bad entities.
That would be the response within the same Twitter thread. Okay, in the post Israelis versus Arabs, I wrote about Arabs who take part in the Israeli-Arab conflict, as anyone who can read knows. #dumbasses. Okay, quote, I think it has much more to do with the fact that the Palestinian leadership supported by the Palestinian population uses millions for terror. I should have been more specific. Arabs who actively seek Israel's destruction. Those would be the follow-up tweets. Does that sound like genocidal mania to you, or does it sound like I'm specifically labeling a group of people who have called for Israel's destruction?
I like to point out that you're not a racist, but they're dumbasses, and you're allowed to insult them.
Yes, because if someone calls me a racist without evidence, they are definitionally a dumbass.
What is genocide? Wait.
I take a little bit of issue with that. I mean, I don't think he's being racist there so much. I don't think he's actually racist, but I do think he believes in fundamentally unfair policies. And he believes in inegalitarian policies, and just inequitarian policies. So, I mean, unfair. So, in that sense, he is maybe not racist, but doing something that is just as bad.
What is genocide? Like so you said that you want to be like Churchill, right? And after the Allies, when they moved the German-speaking Polish out of Poland.
So now you're talking about a column I wrote when I was 19 years old that I morally abhorred and denounced myself. I think 6 years ago.
Yeah,
and have repeatedly said was a bad column that I wrote when I was 19 years old.
Okay.
Okay, so
I wish I had more time. Like, do you want to get a drink sometime? Like a non-alcoholic beverage?
What was that? Say it one more time.
Do you want to get a non-alcoholic drink sometime? Because I have a lot here. I really do.
I know that you've got a book for. Let me just say this. For everything that you're going to say, I've addressed literally every one of those points. I have a column that I put out probably only a few months ago. And the literal title of it is, so here's a giant list of all the dumb stuff I've ever done. Don't worry, I'll keep updating it.
I didn't get that one in my research. I do apologize if I've misrepresented. Like, my research wasn't able to be so thorough, because it was a pretty last-minute decision to start, like, really going in trying to ask you a question.
And again,
But
that's totally fine, and I appreciate you coming, and I
Yeah.
appreciate you asking me the questions. But if the notion is that I'm a racist before you actually read all of my responses to that.
I mean, the racist is just one part. I also like the transgender. Like, you don't believe in transgenders, and like that's not really
Well,
supported
I
by
mean, I don't know what
biology.
that means. I don't believe in transgenders. I mean,
Well,
transgender people exist. It's not
You've
something to
said
believe in
that
or not.
You've said that gender and sex are the same thing. They think they're
I've said that
synonymous.
gender and sex are linked. I've said that femininity and masculinity
Just
are
before-
linked to male and female.
Just before you said that they were.
Right, there are two genders. I don't believe there are 1,000 genders. And if I think that if you're defining gender as just a random series of societal constructs, then there aren't two genders, there are infinite numbers of genders, because everybody is a mix of feminine and masculine. So why restrict it to 70 genders? Make it 6 billion genders, since we all have our unique mix of what male and female constitute. And
Yeah,
I don't. And by-
I agree with that. I'm just into just getting rid of. Again, I'm into sort of simplification. I want simplicity. So just get rid of all that stuff.
And yes, I don't think that there can be such a thing as a male in a female's body. I don't think that there is a.
But that's kind of silly. Like if your brain is that it completely contradicts the idea that you, Ben, said before that that not all people are equal and that not all people are just the like there are differences on average between males and females, but like it's not like all women are like this and all men are like that. So it's perfectly plausible that there might be a person who is biologically male who has a brain that develops into being a female, like female type brain, and who feels like a female. Uh, I don't see why that wouldn't make what the problem and
female in a male's body, and I find the logic to support that and the science to support that utterly lacking.
So again, I didn't.
I'd be happy to get a non-alcoholic beverage with you and discuss it more fully. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is John, and I am a senior doing a political science major, and I would like to ask the question in regards to this. Sorry, this is my first time ever doing
No worries,
this
don't
sort
go.
of thing.
It's fine.
Okay. You stated that you didn't care about people's concern about the browning of America, which, in my opinion, is essentially not caring about the issue of illegal immigration.
No, that's not right. Sorry, go ahead.
and yet you support Israel's ethno-state by stating that Judaism must be preserved, since elements like this uphold Jewish national identity and culture, which I don't mind. But the fact that you don't care about the demographic change in America is kind of concerning, because we're all Americans here, right?
Okay.
And the question is, do you want our nation to end up like a third world country such as Brazil, or a disaster like Germany and Sweden right now?
Okay, so Brazil's a second world country. Technically, it's a developing country. It's not like a fully underdeveloped country or a failed state.
Then why is there a far right candidate winning at the moment?
I mean, if you want to argue Brazilian politics, I agree that Brazilian politics have been dominated by the far left, but I'm not sure that that's of tremendous interest. Let's talk about the first question. Okay, when I say I don't care about the browning of America, what I mean is I don't care about ethnicity. It doesn't make any difference to me. The only thing that makes a difference to me is the ideals of the people who are coming across the border. Now, when people say I am pro-illegal immigration, I do not know where in the hell they would possibly get that. This seems to, when people repeatedly say stuff like this, and I see this meme all the time. Oh, Shapiro cares about a Jewish ethno-state, but he doesn't care about illegal immigration. I was further right than Donald Trump was in the last election cycle on illegal immigration. I opposed the 2006 amnesty deal. I opposed the 2010 amnesty deal. I've consistently been anti-illegal immigration. I supported the wall. This is just a lie. The idea that I'm pro-illegal immigration is not true in the slightest.
Okay, well, just thanks for confirming that you're like that.
What I have said is that we ought to deal with how to stop the influx of illegal immigration, and then deal with the people who are here and separate off the two issues. And when it comes to the folks who are here illegally, what we should do is we should assess those folks in the same way we assess everybody else coming into the country. Are they going to add economically to the country and culturally to the country? Are they going to make the country a better place? Or are they going to make the country a worse place? And
again, that is a Nazi reasoning. But again, it's based on the whole. I mean, from the moment that you accept the existence of a country, you have a Nazi reasoning. So again, like, yeah.
And that involves assimilation. Now, as far as the idea of the Jewish ethno-state, I don't care very much about, at all actually, about Jewish ethnicity. Jewish ethnicity makes no difference to me. What does make a difference to me is Jewish ideals, because I care about Judeo-Christian ideals in the United States, and I care about Jewish ideals in Israel, which is why I don't care, and I'm very happy, that thousands, tens of thousands of Ethiopian Jews who are black were flown to Israel to become Israelis. I'm very happy that tens of thousands of Russian Jews who were Russian were flown from Russia to become Israelis. My wife is Moroccan, right? She's Moroccan Israeli. So this idea that it's about ethnicity as opposed to ideology or ideas is just not true. The amazing thing about Judaism, just like most other religions, is you can become one. Okay, I can't become a black man. There's no way for me to do it, right? I can become a Christian. You could become a Jew, right? This means that there are ideological systems that you can buy into that allow you entry. And I believe that the United States should operate the same way. You can become an American if you buy into Central American ideals, but I'm not going to pretend that I care whether a bunch of people who are pro-America and pro-American ideals come from Cuba versus coming from Britain.
I understand that. I respect your beliefs and your right to hold them, Ben. I just think that personally...
I have a question for you. Why are you equating white or race with culture? Why are you saying these are the same thing?
Well, because most, Jews mostly practice Judaism, and just like,
Well, actually, most Jews actually don't practice Judaism, technically speaking. But most ethnic Jews are lefties.
Most of them are part of that. So it's only a minority of people that want to convert to Judaism, which I don't mind.
Okay, and it's only a minority of people who want to become Americans, or we should let in if they want to become Americans enough. I'm asking not about Israel, I'm asking you about America.
Okay,
I'm asking you about America. So you're saying that you object to the so-called browning of America. Why?
I'm just saying I object to illegal immigration, which,
So do I, but your original question was about the browning of America,
yeah,
so why?
It's basically like the open borders.
It's like Nazi versus turbo-Nazi arguing against each other. And Nazi trying to justify to Turbo-Nazi that he's still a Nazi, and Turbo-Nazi trying to make his Turbo-Nazi-ness not become too apparent.
I agree with you about illegal immigration.
That's going on right now.
I agree with you about illegal immigration.
Yeah.
I asked you not about that. I'm asking you about the browning of America phrase, because that's what you objected to. I said I don't care about the browning.
The whole entire culture is changing at the moment, just so you know.
I understand that culture is changing at the moment, but I do not think that culture and race are inseparable. I don't think that brown people are less capable of becoming American, or black people are less capable of becoming American, or Jews, or anybody else.
And I agree that,
Thank you, Ben, for being a non-ethno-Nazi. Just being just Nazi. It's still not great, but it's already better than ethno-Nazi, which is what most people think of when they say Nazi, right? But fundamentally, ethno-Nazis are still Nazis, because literally you still don't believe in inequality between all individuals, and literally you'd be willing to wage war and literally kill other individuals because they're in a different country and have opposing interests.
When people come to this country, including myself and my family who immigrated here illegally in the 80s.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I thought he looked a little Hispanic himself, didn't he? So that is quite ironic.
And I think that that people that do it, they follow the law and they assimilate, they should do that.
Right. I mean, let's put it this way. Can we agree on this? I care about the liberalizing of America and the destruction of American values. I don't care about what...
Yeah, but I hate this conflation of Rourkeism with American values. They always portray themselves as the real Americans somehow, and that is such a mistake.
Nature of the people who look like is who believe in American values. Those people are my family. Everybody who doesn't believe in those American ideals is not.
All right. Thank you.
This will be the last question, ladies and gentlemen. This will be the last question.
Hey, how's it going?
Big Ben, what's up with you?
How's it going, dude?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Okay, so my question is, well, first I'm gonna kind of.
I need to give you this hammer. You're enormous, dude. Like, you can wield this much better than I can. I look like one of the dwarves from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. I'm like, go mining or something.
Appreciate that. So first I'm gonna kind of paraphrase another speaker who kind of operates along your same tone in America, Jordan Peterson. Dr. Jordan
Yeah,
Peterson.
I knew you'd say that. Oh man, the dynamic duo that. Oh man, oh boy, Ben and Jordan. Wow, it's like all of those groups. Like, what do you what would be a good equivalent sort of duo for that? I don't know. I don't know. I can't think of any sort of equivalent one. But oh man, oh man. Like those two are just between the two of them, they're like creating so much brainwashing. They're just like literally poisoning the minds of millions of people. I'm not sure which one I dislike the most. It's hard. It's hard for me to know. They're like both, sort of university people who are sort of who are smart but idiots at the same time. I'm not sure which one I hate
So
more.
one
I'm not sure. It's hard. It's really hard.
of the things that he often talks about is at the basis or the premise of the ongoing debate between conservatism versus liberalism is that at the basis of each, conservatism is like the protection of the hierarchy, whereas on the liberal side, it's more so the protection and promotion of egalitarianism. And so my question to you is, one thing that he makes clear is that both sides are necessary for or are ideal in a country that moves forward at a fast pace as the United States has done. And so my question to you is, it seems as though you have you have such a hostility towards liberals and leftists, whereas I don't often hear you at all say that there's anything that you can learn from their side. In his book, 12 Rules of Life, one of the chapters is assume that the person in which you're speaking with has something to offer you as far as intellectually that you may learn from them. So my question to you is, I guess, what is your position? Like, do you feel as though a liberal, or obviously a liberal, but liberals in general or leftists in general have anything to bring to the table from an ideology standpoint or intellectually?
I mean, passion for change is obviously, it can be a good thing when directed in the proper channels. As you say, the left's focus on egalitarianism is good so long as it is focused on the equal application of rights, not on the false attempts to override biology and
Tell me
natural
that, Nazi.
hierarchies. I think Jordan would agree with me on the idea that if you butt up against a natural hierarchy, or if you butt up against natural differences, because I don't think every difference is a hierarchy. If you butt up against natural difference, you butt up against reality. Trying to override reality with artificial equality is going to be a giant failure and can, as Jordan would say, murder millions in the process, right? That's what Jordan thinks communism was basically there are differences between human beings. Failure to respect those differences is what, in the name of equality, is what leads to the gulags. So while Jordan...
Yeah, and that's really what I hate, because they like bring it, they like compare all sorts of very different sort of I don't know. They like kind of conflate all sorts of very different movements, things that strike me as being very different. They all just paint it with the same brush, and I utterly disagree with that. And then they'll use that argument to then fight against my argument of equality, equity between people, for global society. They'll say, oh, there are inalienable differences between cultures and stuff, and as a result, we can't have a global society. And then they'll say, oh, look at what the Marxists did, and that caused to the millions of deaths and stuff. And then they'll literally wage a war in opposition to just a globalist policy, which is absolutely necessary for proper equity, which is a fundamental pillar of ethics again. And then they'll say, like, look what you made me do. It's like literally, I don't know. It's like literally you find someone who's like, you walk in the street and you see like this big hairy man raping a poor defenseless woman, and you say like, please stop raping that woman. And he says like, no, get lost. He says like, and I say, no, come on, come on. And he says like, you got a problem or something. And so then you actually say, well, look, I'm going to prevent you from doing this at this point. I'm going to forcefully remove you, right? And so then he says like, uh, you're going to regret this or something. So then you try to forcefully remove it. Then that person hits you, right? And then you have to hit that person back. And then that person gets hurt. And then she also gets hurt because of there's just been this whole sort of, you know, fight, and so everybody got hurt. And then the rapist says, "See, look what you did! Look what you did! You created, you hurt the three people, and because like you're all three of you are like badly injured or something." And so then the rapist will actually make it that the person who said stop raping and who actually prevented the rape from keeping on occurring, the rapist will portray it as being the anti-rapist's fault. And that is what the right wing does about for all these sort of all these movements to increase equity between people.
Jordan, I think he's a little bit less robust in the language that he uses with regard to left. He's just as anti-left with regard to the focus on hardcore egalitarianism.
Yeah, I think Jordan is equally anti-left. I don't really see a difference.
Where
he calls himself a classical liberal, but that's kind of funny.
The left. So I do think, and I do make a distinction between, as I've said, liberals and the left. The left is a far more censorious force, and they want to censor a lot more. They're a lot more tyrannical. They want to control a lot more from the top. People who are liberals, who are arguing over the proper scope of government in particular areas, there I think there's plenty to learn, and I think that you can have fulsome exchanges about the nature of what sort of social welfare state can be supported or is appropriate, and you can have a data exchange on that sort of thing. Where you can't really have an exchange is when you're running up against, is when people are falsifying the facts, as they are when they say that men and women are exactly the same, for example. So I appreciate the critique, and I'll try to take that to heart. And I think that, and I will acknowledge also that I think that folks had a lot more to learn from the left in the 1960s than they do now, because the country has moved in a lot of very good ways since the 1960s, and in some bad ways since the 1960s.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so
Can I ask another question, or
yeah, one more. Go for it.
We have another one. Okay, and this has to do with the whole national anthem in players kneeling during games in the NFL. And so my question is this, I feel that regardless of whether you agree with the act or not, someone taking a knee during the national anthem at the beginning of a football game, I believe that if you don't say, okay, I disagree with the act, I don't think it's the right place, I don't think it's the right whatever the case may be, however, I agree with it in so much as I would like to protect that individual's freedom of speech. And my question is, I don't hear, well, you certainly, or a lot of anyone on the conservative side or right side, as you would call it, as someone may call it, defending, saying, okay, look, I don't agree with it, but I agree with that person's freedom of speech in that moment, or utilizing that act.
So it depends on the forum. So this is a public university. I have a right to speak here, right? There's a difference between that and, for example, DePaul University. So DePaul University is a private university. Last year, I think it was last year, DePaul invited me to speak, or at least some of the students did. The administration said I couldn't, and when I showed up on campus, they threatened to arrest me. I didn't sue the university because they have a right to do that. I think they're wrong, I think they're foolish, but they have a right to do that. Okay. So Colin Kaepernick does not have the right to kneel on the sidelines of a private NFL event. If he wants to kneel in a park, he's more than welcome to do so.
According to who, he doesn't have the right?
Well, he doesn't have the legal right. He can't sue the NFL to force them to...
Oh, sure, he can't sue the NFL, certainly.
So that's the distinction that I'm making. When it comes, like, if Colin Kaepernick were to come here, like right here, and like after the event that we haven't organized, he wants to kneel on the stage all day long, that's totally fine. It's a public university, he can do what he wants. So time, place, and manner restrictions are a thing, and so is private versus public. So I'll defend Colin Kaepernick's right to say whatever the hell he wants in any public area, so long as he's not violating the rights of private property owners to control their property, because they do have rights. Like, he couldn't come into my living room and just kneel on the floor.
Do you think the conversation is based around the fact that the NFL is a private organization, or is it based around the fact that they feel that that action disrespects our military in that moment because the national anthem is so associated
I think the NFL handled this in the worst way possible, which is they allowed certain messages and not other messages.
Then we're on the same page.
Right. So like a few years ago, there were a bunch of guys in Missouri who did the hands up, don't shoot shoot symbol coming out of the St. Louis Rams. They came out of the tunnel doing the hands up, don't shoot. They weren't fined, nothing happened. If the NFL wants to set a standard that you're not allowed to make political statements during the games or in the warm-ups or something, totally cool. But if they're going to be inconsistent in the application of those standards, then I've got a bit of a problem with them. And I think that Roger Goodell has done a terrible job with that. And you know how you know this? Because David Stern actually banned people from sitting for the national anthem in 1996 with Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, and nothing happened. He set the standard, that was the end of it. If you want to go protest, don't protest here, go protest somewhere else, and nobody cared. But that's really not even look, the larger issue about Kaepernick is, whether it is appropriate generally for people to kneel for the national anthem or whether we should be insulted by that. My feeling is that it's generally not appropriate, but you have having a right to do something.
Okay, I'm going to stop here. Maybe this way I'm going to be slightly less likely to get a copyright strike. So, all right.